Whee! The painting's ramblings. Three, the painting's ramblings. Oh, jeez. Hello? What? Okay. Oh, okay. Guess this is George? Why, hello there, Giselle. Doing your rounds again? Such a diligent young lady you are. You could get away with cleaning this place once every couple of decades and no one be the wiser. What? You're not Giselle? That's someone else? Oh, no, you're just the maid? And who am I, you ask? Well, this is quite the pickle. What on earth could have happened while I was dozing off? You think you're just a maid, and you think you're the witch at the same time. You've forgotten just about everything, and I don't think anything I say is going to fix that. You do seem a bit mellower now, and not so constantly miserable. Wasn't sure what to say to you before, or if I should say anything at all. I didn't say much out of consideration for you. Oh, so. Not that you could really tell from looking at me, I guess. If forgetting takes some weight off you, then maybe it's for the best. Not that I think you should forget, and not that I want you to forget about Michelle, but I won't blame you for choosing not to spend God knows how much longer agonizing over it. Nothing wrong with abandoning ship, especially considering how long you've spent on it. And hey, it hurt me too seeing you in so much pain, so we both come out on top here, I guess. What a kind painting, you say? Well, thank you kindly. But the truth is, I'm not nearly as upstanding a guy as people think I am. And it was us Belanges that turned your life upside down and caused you all that misery and suffering. Yeah, I know. The first dumbfounded smile was testament enough. Everything I say is going in one ear and out the other. Which means I'm free to say whatever I want. By the time tomorrow rolls around, you'll have forgotten all about the curious talking painting you'll have forgotten all about the curious talking painting you chanced upon today. So I'll start with this. It's a huge relief to see you smiling again. It's not the smile of someone right in the head, I can see that much, but it's a lot easier on the eyes and the heart than how you were before. Like I said, I'm a real winner. I'm not particularly concerned about putting up appearances here. Call me heartless if you will. You wouldn't be wrong. I'm not going to pretend I'm some saint, but at the same time, I'm not going to play like I'm a cackling villain either. If there's one thing I don't want people to see, though, it's me looking weak. I'm the laid-back guy without a care in the world. That's who I want people to see when they look at me. My big brother was your standard cookie cutter, you can count on me for anything kind of brother. I mean, that ended up not being the case, but he sure looked the part. And Michelle, he always looked up to D. Went to him for everything, gave him all his love. D was tall and well-built, muscular. Everything about him screamed manly man, and I kinda admired that too, though not nearly as much as Michelle did. I became a painter in part because I didn't want to follow in my brother's footsteps. Not to say I don't like painting, I love it, but people weren't going to be inclined to compare us as often. I didn't have to be as fit as him, or as good at chess. I had my own thing to be good at, art. I couldn't beat him at his own game, so I beat him at mine. And my whole not a care in the world deal was probably, at least on some level, a shield against having to admit I couldn't compare. If we were a few years further apart, maybe I could have just had the same admiration and respect for him as Michelle. But there's not much getting past that boyish competitiveness when you're so close in age. I know I've been rambling at you for a while already, but would you mind sticking around a little longer? Great. I've got an old story I'd like to get off my chest. This is something I was planning to take to the grave, and something I don't think Giselle ever needs to know. But, well, you say you're not Giselle anymore, and I'm already in the grave, so what the hell? I'm just gonna talk to myself for a bit here, and if you'd kindly forget anything you may overhear, that'd be lovely. Back before I became a painting, I was the head of the Boulanger family, though I spent most of my time painting. It really wasn't the job for me, though. A guy who half-assed his way straight through life, so I left all the businessy stuff to my wife and me. Now she was a real capable girl. If she'd been born a guy, she would have made one heck of a diplomat, possibly even caught the king's eye. Before we were married, she'd had a bit of a fling with Dee, which she felt real bad about later. Probably didn't help that I had a tendency to bring it up from time to time, not all the time, just occasionally. But that aside, she was a faithful, hard-working partner. It didn't take long for us to become known as the dope and his able bride, to which Aimee would always interject, George is a very, very capable man, thank you very much. Now, that probably makes it sound like I just shoved all the work of running the house onto her, but in truth, she wanted the job. She quite enjoyed it, and who was I to complain? It also meant I didn't have to deal with one of the family's more significant dilemmas, namely my mother. Not to be crass, but Mom was not quite all there. She'd always been a bit of a nervous wreck, and it didn't take much to set her off, but it was what happened with Michelle that finally broke her. Mom had, I guess you could say, a very particular image of what she wanted Michelle to be, and he ended up not fitting that image. Now, you're probably thinking, that doesn't seem like such a big deal, but it is. I just can't tell you why. Michelle has to be the one to tell you. Anyway, some bad stuff went down, and at the end of it all, Mom was constantly hovering over the edge. Dad gave up on her entirely, and I just wasn't sure how to approach her, so I kept my distance. Aimee was the only one in the family who would actively engage with Mom. So while she had betrayed me once, I had to come to trust Aimee again. We had a couple kids, I turned into a doting fodder, and life was swell. All my problems swept under the rug. Mom's condition. Michelle. I left it all to Aimee and enjoyed a pleasant, carefree life. But then Giselle, or I guess you're just the maid now, not long after Michelle died. My oh my? You really aren't Giselle anymore, huh? Oh, what was that? Oh. So back to my rambling. Michelle died and I got furious at Dee over it, but I keep coming back to that, who really deserved the brunt of blaming that situation. It's nice and comfy to sit back and do nothing. You can throw blame around all you want. It wasn't your fault after all. You're not the one who killed him, you know? It wasn't long afterwards that Dee died too, killed on the battlefield. I was told he died a very noble death, but I couldn't help but think he was in a hurry to escape. Listening to the news, I kept telling myself, I shouldn't have snapped at him like that. I shouldn't have blamed him. Dee had to choose between protecting Mom or protecting our brother, and he settled on Mom. He was too hard-headed to come up with a way to protect them both, though even if he had, it was too risky. He served the church directly, and we were all under its thumb. If word spread that one of our own had supposedly sold his soul to the devil, that would be the end of the Boulanger family. I wouldn't have escaped unscathed either. Losing both of my brothers in quick succession crushed me, and as I started breaking down, it was, you guessed it, Aimee who comforted me. It's terrible what happened, but it's not your fault. That was around when I began sensing something was off. I mean, she'd had a thing with Dee. You'd expect she would have been bawling her eyes out right alongside me. So why on earth was she so calm? But I didn't press her on it. I knew I wouldn't get an answer even if I did. And I also didn't have much of a right to question Aimee when I was pushing all my problems onto her. Doubly so knowing that opening my dumb mouth was what had done this to Dee in the first place. And before long, we went back to our normal routine. About 8 years after Michelle's death, Mom was gone too, and the Boulanger family was down to me, Aimee, and our 2 sons. I had started teaching the boys how to paint, and I loved every minute of it. And then one day, I started feeling unwell. My fingers would get kind of tingly, such that holding a brush for long periods of time would hurt. So gradually, my time spent both teaching and painting dwindled, and even leaving the manor became difficult. At first, I just thought it was a little strange, nothing to be worried about. But then it started getting real bad, and I'd be stuck in bed for days at a time. We called the doctor to look at me, but he couldn't find anything wrong. May said I must be overworking myself, and she made me these nice hearty meals, hoping to bring back my energy, but my condition only got worse. Eventually, I started losing my appetite, but May, she insisted I eat anyway, or I would never get better. So you know what I did? I tossed out the meals she made when she wasn't looking. I sent my younger boy out to the town to buy me food in secret, and for a while I ate that instead of May's meals, making sure it looked like nothing had changed. And after a week or two, the tingling in my fingers started going away. Bruh! May! Oh my gosh! I could only laugh and grit my teeth, then cry my eyes out. I made a life with this woman, trusted her, and she goes and does this. Anger and sorrow were drowned out by raw heartbreak. My firstborn, he was getting to be about the age he could take over, which is why I had used my younger son to run errands for me. I couldn't be sure the two weren't working together. I was at a total loss. What are you supposed to do when your wife's trying to poison you to a slow death? Even now, I'm not sure what the right course of action in that situation would have been. Maybe I could have banished her, had her punished, but remember, I was only head in name. She handled everything, and there was no way I would have been able to pick up the pieces after throwing her out. And if my suspicions were right and my older boy was in on it too, getting rid of May wouldn't have solved anything. What then? Spend the rest of my days living in fear of my own family? I was, by that point, born pretty thin, both physically and emotionally. Every thought led me to the worst possible outcome. I couldn't, for the life of me, come up with a workable solution. Eventually, I got it into my head that it was punishment, that I deserved it. Obviously, what May was doing wasn't right, but my hands weren't exactly clean either. Maybe Mom could have recovered if I had looked after her. Maybe Dee would still be alive if I had put myself in his shoes instead of just snapping at him. Maybe if I had given everyone the care and attention they deserved, Michelle wouldn't have had to die. Burying your head in the sand doesn't absolve you of responsibility. And when I finally realized how great a sin inaction was, it was far too late. I'm dumb, short-sighted, and I hated myself for not figuring that out sooner. It should have been stupidly obvious what my action and inaction were doing to the people around me. I should have seen all of this coming. Yeah, May had betrayed me, but she wasn't the only one guilty of that. When I was going through Michelle's stuff after his death, I came across a painting that had been torn to shreds that I had made. By refusing to use my head, I had done something that denied his identity, and he left this world still carrying the pain that I had caused him. By the time I had come to that conclusion, I wondered why I was even alive at all. I couldn't blame anyone for wanting me dead. So I started eating amazing meals again, knowing good and well it would likely kill me. I didn't stop sending my younger boy out though, just not for food. I also strongly encouraged him to move out and become a court artist. Then I started painting again. It was going to be my final piece. Every day, the tingling in my hands spread a little farther. My breathing grew a little more labored. I was afraid I might not finish while I was still able to get out of bed, but I somehow managed. It was the most harrowing experience I'd had painting something in my entire life. True to her facade, May stayed at my side until my last breath. She held my hand tight, giving me a strained smile. It didn't occur to me at that time, but May always seemed to be smiling no matter what. In a way, it's kind of impressive how she managed to keep up the loving wife act while simultaneously loading me up with poison. Tell me, May, how deep did your poison flow? When you were looking after Mom, did you talk about Michelle? Knowing you probably figured out he was still alive, and I bet you read his final letter to her. It was you who pushed her to set everything in motion, wasn't it? Oh God, no! No! There were so many things I wanted to say, but I stayed my tongue and made these my parting words. I loved you so much, May, so I ask you this. Keep my last painting in memory of me. I have no idea if she actually did as I requested, but the last thing I saw before I passed was her nodding, a smile on her lips. The paint I used to make it, I mixed with a special something I had my younger boy go out and buy for me. A substance that, according to what I was told, slowly dissolves into the air, making it toxic. And it has some sort of reaction with the paint as well, turning it almost black. Oh, well, I'm quite proud of how it turned out, if I do say so myself. It was a gorgeous landscape painting. Wait a minute. Sorry for rambling at you for so long. That's the end of my story. Were you even listening to me? What? You have to go clean the fireplace? Well, alright. Don't let me keep you. Just please make sure you forget everything by tomorrow, alright? I'm counting on you. I know. Why even say anything, right? I wanted to tell someone. I just don't want anyone to actually know about it. The human heart's a big ball of contradictions like that, you know? You don't? Oh, okay. Well, see ya. It'll be another few decades before you come by again, I imagine. And when you do, will it be our first time meeting again? Will you even be able to hear my voice anymore by then? Maybe it'd be best if I forgot everything too. Who knows? So long, maid. Take care. When an angel comes to judge me, how will his scales tilt? Towards forgiveness? Or towards reckoning? But you know, I don't want it to be an angel who makes that decision. No. You don't have to be an angel. You don't have to be an angel at all. That was nice. Get her ass, dude! Oh my gosh. Spicy. The Revenant's Dream. Ah, this one. What is it? Farewell, Jacobo, until our souls cross paths once more in the boundless sphere of fate. Goodbye, Morgana. Morgana. She believed that was the end of it all. That by releasing their souls from the curse, they would all return to their rightful places. So this is Jacobo? That the realm containing the cursed mansion would dissipate, and the natural order of the world would take care of the rest. Pain? More pain? Oh no. Well, yeah, I should have known. The first two stories already gave me pain. This is I love it. Both she and the good-hearted young man who had guided her to her salvation believed that. But the young man underestimated how strong his love was, and the girl underestimated how wholly and thoroughly he blamed himself. He sent her off and then remained in place. He could not forgive himself for what he had done, and so he did not deserve to move on. The Revenant's Dream. The next thing she realized, she was in a field of gold, wheat rolling in the wind like a golden ocean. The sky blue as sapphire, the breeze almost startlingly warm. It was an unbelievably gentle view, and one she did not recognize. She had never seen this place before, never been there before. Yet looking out at it now, she felt emotional. It was almost terrifyingly beautiful. And as if drawn in by it, the girl took a step forward. With each subsequent step, the soft sound of crunching beneath her feet grew more distinct. Evidently, her soul had begun taking physical form, and it was her body from life that the golden ocean created for her. She raised her left arm, which had been severed before she was placed in captivity. It was whole. Still uncertain, she placed a hand on her cheek. There she found none of the scars or the rough texture of the markings that had caused her so much torment in life. What's going on here? She was perplexed. Where was this place? When was it? And what was she doing here, in that form no less? The girl continued walking, in spite of her consternation, in spite of herself at that. It was the gentlest domains that had always caused her the most pain. The most pleasant memories were the sharpest knives. If her life had taught her one thing, it was that. And from then on, she had done everything in her power to eliminate those things. Which is why she had locked the warmly inviting master bedroom in the cursed mansion and threw the key into the painting. But now, she was being drawn into another such realm. She felt as though she needed to push forward. And soon, as she approached the far edge of the wheat field, she caught sight of a figure. Seeing it, she stopped dead with a gulp. She knew what this world was. It was his world. Much like she had crafted her own realm to contain her curse, He too had built himself a world of illusion. Upon reaching this realization, a flood of images and memories rushed over her. But this was not unusual, as she had experienced projections of others' memories in the cursed mansion as well. The living and the dead perceived the world differently, for while the living were bound by their bodies, the dead were bound by recollections and emotions. Nonetheless, it had been Michelle, not her, who had dived into the memories directly. So this was her first time truly experiencing the phenomenon herself. Though she was uncertain as to whether the experience was intensified by her own involvement in these specific memories. They were of her as a child, of the young man applying ointment to her face every day for 3 years. She would claim it unnecessary, insult him, complain in any way she could, but still the young man came back the next day. Even on days she fought to the point of truly angering him, he still applied the ointment. He was a strange man, she thought. For what purpose did he pay her so much mind? No other men wanted to get near her. The hideous scars covering her face were quite an effective deterrent, and most would probably cut off their own hands before volunteering to touch them. He alone was different, though. One day, he chastised her for making the trek to the graveyard every day, in rain or snow or anything in between. But she realized now that his criticism applied to him as well. In the pouring rain or the midst of a blizzard, in winds so strong they could knock a grown man to the ground, or even when he was hurt or sick himself, he never missed a day coming to find her at the graveyard. Next, she saw the rising sun, being carried on his back, traveling a different path home than the one she knew. The stench of decomposing flesh, unavoidable in alleys of the slums. Her surroundings utterly repugnant, yet the sunrise oddly enchanting. The sun's light even reaches this deep, dark corner of the world. I mean, of course it does, but I don't know. For some reason, it seems particularly bright today. She said nothing in response, but she felt the same way. She had spent her whole life looking down at her feet, never taking the time to look up and appreciate the sky. And she likely never would have either. Never been able to see the beauty in the rising sun without a nudge. And subsequently, whenever the evil lord would show himself in her dreams, she was able to close her eyes and block him out, until eventually she was no longer able to remember his face or the sound of his voice. Her wounds were at last beginning to heal. He had given her so much, an ordinary life and ordinary happiness, the freedom from having to be special, and warmth she had never before known. But those memories only served to salt her wounds. Every image of the slave boy showing her kindness was another crack in her foundation. I can't. He killed me. With the same hands he had used to treat her wounds, he later took her life. He tainted all her memories, shattered the illusion of warmth, ruined her all the way down to her soul, turned everything into hatred and anger. A fury so intense that fury so intense that even the young saint's unconditional love was insufficient to assuage it. The only reason she had managed to maintain her composure at the very end was because Michelle was there with her, holding her hand. She would not have gone to see him at all otherwise. But now she was alone, so she would leave. She had no interest in seeing that man again. And when she made to head back the way she had come, she caught a glance at the shadowy figure's condition. It was beaten and broken, crumbling away. She looked down in silence on the shadow, which barely maintained its own form. She had seen souls decay to this state before, such as Michelle's when he arrived at the mansion after centuries lost, broken down and reformed again and again, with only Giselle's voice as his guide. By the time he found his way there, he was unrecognizable, hardly a wisp of a spirit, and capable of individual thought, blindly following Giselle's lead. She understood why Michelle's soul had taken so much damage. He had been abused and mistreated to an unimaginable degree his entire life. It made sense that he would wish for an ending more permanent than even death. But him? What are you doing so broken? She could not understand what had brought him to this point. He was the perpetrator, a monster. No matter how kind he had been to her before, that did not change what he had done after that. So what did he think he was doing looking so mangled and beaten? If she left him there, before long his soul would disappear for good, rubbed out of existence, never to return to the boundless sphere of fate. Good. Let him. She bit her lip. Yes, let him. Then she would be free of his torture once and for all. She would never have to see him again. Never have to torment herself with thoughts of him. And what a relief that would be. So she tried to turn back, but her body would not let her. An emotion she did not understand had welled up in her breast. It was pity, though she could not put a name to it herself. It was an emotion she had never felt during her time as the witch. And in fact, were the witch here, she would have cackled joyously at the sight, pointing a skeletal finger at the pathetic thing he had become and telling him how much he deserved it. But she was no longer that witch. And furthermore, she had been blessed with unconditional love by Michelle and Giselle, and the benevolent portion of her soul, which she had rent from herself to create the white-haired girl, was beginning to return to its rightful place. She thought she heard a voice from within, telling her that only she could save him. She frowned. Why would she have to save him after all the pain and suffering he had caused for her? The voice within spoke. Michelle had stepped forward to save her after all the pain and suffering she had put him through. Giselle too held no grudge after being imprisoned in the mansion by her for centuries, happily joining Michelle on his quest. She took a single step forward. The wheat swayed as she did, making the scene even more dreamlike. Initially, she had been irritated to find him here, trying to hide from his sins in this realm of illusion. But now, she was beginning to realize that was not the case. His memories and feelings flowed over her, with more clarity this time. This was what he could have had if he had not made all those mistakes. And this was the place he had hoped to show her one day. He was not hiding from his sins. He was attempting to atone for them. He had condemned his sins, lamented his failures, and forced himself to look at this vision of the world he had let slip through his fingers, again and again until it had destroyed his soul. This was his punishment for himself. And not only for what he had done to Morgana, but her other half, the white-haired girl, as well. She had said in a letter that she wished to see his homeland, and he had failed to see that through as well. Twice, he had broken what he was supposed to care about most. Twice, he had crushed her, and he could never forgive himself for that. Not even after she had released him from her curse. You truly are the biggest fool in all the world. She had never in all her time seen more of a disaster of a man, though she was beginning to realize that part of the reason he had done this to himself was because she had rejected his offer to make amends. Told him she would not punish him any further. Not to mention, he was not entirely at fault for his actions in his second life. She had wished to see his life in ruins. She had, in a sense, placed him on that path herself. But he was not one who could place the blame for his actions on others. Everything was always his responsibility and his alone. It was like that in his first life, and his second, and in the illusory alternate scenario where Michelle intervened. Ultimately, I'm the one responsible, he said on their march to atonement. And I suppose, to make sure the next lives go a little better, he said, excluding himself from any potential redemption. So what, though? That doesn't change what he did. Are you saying I should have sent him off with a smile? That I should have to set aside my hatred to make the man who hurt me feel better? She took another step toward the amorphous shadow, still unsure of her own position. The closer she got, the more she wanted to run away. What would she say? What would she do? She had not an inkling of an idea. Not a single fully formed thought about what came after this. The shade noticed her, lifting its head. She tensed up. It was hideous, hardly even recognizable as human. She could tell somehow that it was smiling at her. It must have been made up of all the things he wanted to do for her, she thought. The shade seemed to think she was part of the illusion. In that case, she thought, in that case, she could just play along with it. Pretending she was another phantom in this dreamscape would reduce the pressure on her, giving her time to think. Though in truth, she likely wanted to indulge in that fantasy herself. The long-lost possibility of nothing going wrong, of him finding their homeland. Even knowing it was all a sham, an insignificant sliver of a dream, she probably still wanted to partake in its warmth. Maybe then she would be able to give him a genuine smile. So, what's on the agenda for today? Initially, she only intended to play along with the illusion, but in time she found herself being drawn into the dream world as well. A fantasy where he had never become the Lord, she never the witch, and the both of them lived uneventful lives in their undiscovered homeland. It was pleasant and peaceful. She soon began enjoying it in earnest. She had turned off her mind, simply starting accepting things as they happened, which she was only able to do because he was hardly recognizable as him. She felt she had really gone back to being a 16-year-old girl, like she had grown up a normal life, not filled with tragedy. And oh, how wonderful that would have been if it could have been true. He asked her to sing for him, so she brought him into the shade of a large tree. He told her he had borrowed a lute, but he held nothing in his amorphous hands, so she merely played along. In his vision of this realm, there were others like us for him to borrow from. They sat down in the shade of the tree and sang, only her voice to carry the tune. Like Michelle in the same condition, the shade was barely able to produce any coherent sound, let alone music. But still, she could tell what he was trying to say and how he was saying it. The longer she spent in the realm of illusion, the more her own state of mind reverted to those days. The 3 years when she had been able to experience happiness like anyone else, while continuing until she reached the age of 16. She was smiling and laughing, though she hardly realized it herself. Nor did she recall that she had explicitly told him previously that she could not smile for him. In time, she even found herself able to speak of her younger days, nothing she had not told him even in life. So, you did that right? Whatever. How she was known as a saint, how her blood had miraculous powers, and the people of her village began worshipping her for it. She had, on some level, wanted to talk about that with him in life, wanted to open herself up to him more, wanted him to know more of who she really was. "You're just an ordinary girl," he spoke in an unearthly voice, like thousands of rocks scraping against one another, but to her ears it was the sound of the young slave man's voice, his slightly exasperated, always gentle tone. She smiled. You've said as much so many times now, I'm almost beginning to believe it," she said, wondering if he would have been the one to give her warmth if things had gone differently. Obviously, that was but a hypothetical future, and one they could have never reached, no less. But she had softened up enough to entertain such silly fantasies. She also thought about her homeland, not the small isolated village where she had been born, but someplace farther up her bloodline, her real father's home. "Would you like to meet him?" She was telling him of her father when he suddenly asked her that. She was not sure. She racked her brain in consideration. It was not something she really needed to think about. There was no family here for her to find anymore, after all, but she had indulged herself so deeply in the past that reality was not a concern. She spoke of her father with a hint of sadness in her voice, to which the shade responded with a sudden surge of rage. The whole dreamscape warped around him, and a metallic smell of blood permeated the region. He wanted to seek out her father and mete out divine justice, and the world twisted to fit his image. "Any form of violence is forbidden," she shouted, attempting to calm his fury. "Not even if it's for my sake," she continued. Anytime he had managed to obtain any form of power, it had led him down the path of destruction. He knew no other way to wield it, and because doing so had shown to be effective in accomplishing his immediate goals, he had never bothered to look for any other solutions. which ultimately resulted in him being unable to trust anyone, because he only understood power as a blunt object. He was a soft, cowardly man deep down, but because he learned to kill. I don't want you to hurt anyone else, ever again. The more he hurt others, the more he hurt himself. This was a lesson that was long, long overdue for him. The shadow stared at her in silence for several minutes, as the blood and fiery rage twisting the illusory realm slowly receded. When it was gone, the shade too seemed to have returned to normal, nodding and saying, "All right, I won't." She let out a sigh of relief. She had slipped entirely back into her childhood. They talked more about everything and nothing, such as the Midsummer Festival, the memory of which filled her with yearning for those times, when everyone was still together. Him, his friend Maria, his companion Gratian, and the eternally cheerful Jaren. She was never terribly fond of gatherings of that many people, and that had not changed even now, but she was able to reminisce about it and admit that it had not been entirely awful, that it had been an important, formative moment of her youth, and probably the same for the rest of them as well. His three girls holding hands and dancing in a circle, him playing a tune on the lute, and his friend providing a beat. It was a marvelous day. As she reflected, she realized he had been chasing overly ambitious dreams from the very beginning. All his talk of going out into the world, of taking her with him, and he was no different here in this realm of illusion. Eventually, she grew tired of hearing his fantasies, telling him, climb down off your high horse and adjust. If he was going to keep chasing after stupid dreams, she would laugh at him every time. If he was going to keep chasing after impossible ideals, she would drag him down back to earth. That way, he would never. Then I'll just have to find a new dream. Excuse me? Her mouth hung open in a mix of exasperation and shock, and perhaps a trace of anger. She wanted to shout, tell him how all his idiotic dreams ended with him in shambles, but he seemed unable to pick up on her trepidation, continuing unfazed. I'm going to win your heart. She stood aghast. That was the last thing she ever expected to hear from him, even knowing this whole world was his fantasy about what he wished he could have done for her. She was conflicted. She felt many things, but flattered was a line she would never cross. No matter how much she had reverted to her younger self here, her present self still remained. You murdered me. There's nothing you can do to win my heart. Not a single thing. She found herself very close to saying what she felt, but she set her agitation aside to let the dream continue a bit longer, for her own peace of mind more than his. From that point, he became almost impressively brazen, even asking her to call him by his name, to which she frowned and said in no uncertain terms, "Why would I waste my breath?" visibly disheartening him. After some time having to watch him mope, she could bear it no longer and attempted to raise a new subject. But whether she asked him about learning to play the lute or going fishing together, the only response she received was a half-hearted nod. She sighed, at a complete loss, and then the shadow spoke. "Will you say my name?" Again. Why was he so fixated on such a stupid, insignificant thing? But as he continued, she realized his request was more pitiful and heartfelt than she had ever heard from him. "I don't want you to forget," she gasped. "I don't want you to forget me again." Cracks developed in the shadow. "I don't want you to forget what I look like." It wavered, shook, crumbled. The sound of my voice. But still, he pleaded desperately. "Or how I feel about you." The man who refused to lean on anyone was begging for our validation. "I don't want you to forget what we talked about." They were all things she had long since forgotten about him. What kind of man I was. Things she had locked away in the deepest recesses of her mind. Or all the time we shared together. Memories overflowing with so much warmth they hurt. Please. She cast it all out, his name, his face, his everything. Don't forget me. Which was what had allowed her to mistake him for the Lord. She felt a chill listening to the shade beg and plead endlessly. What was she supposed to do here? At the very least, this meant the end of the peaceful, trouble-free illusion. Why would you ask me that now? She said, her voice strained. I was hoping to. She was hoping to bask in the illusion a little longer. The shadow said nothing. It simply sat there, waiting for her answer. She mulled over the question for a while, then took another step toward it. She was close enough to touch it now. She would never do that. A feeling welled up in her breast. A mixture of wanting to scream, burst into tears, and throw things around like a small child. She forced it back, looking down on the shade. I had remembered. Would anything have been any different? Could we have not ended up so far down the wrong path? If I had gone and found you, would that have stopped you from becoming what you did? There were 1,000 things you could have done differently. If, after taking up at the cottage on the lake, she had gone into town even once, she could have found out they had a new lord. Maybe he was the one who had sent that night to visit her cottage, who she had sent away without talking to. Not to mention, if she had only told him about her childhood, the rumors about her blood having healing powers, he would have been able to make the connection between her and the lakeside witch. If she had done something, maybe she could have stopped him from veering off the straight and narrow. In fact, she was likely the only person who could have stopped him. Why am I blaming myself for his mistakes? He's the only one responsible for his choices. She did not know what to do. She had been at a loss ever since learning the truth. The answers had only brought her more pain, and so she had buried them away somewhere out of sight. That must be why. That must have been why she had not yet returned to her rightful place. While she had been brought unto salvation by the hands of an angel, ceased being the witch, the girl inside was as wounded and suffering as ever. Can I hold your hand? The shade resumed its pleading. Its desperation clawed at her chest. And so, rather than coldly denying the request, she found herself saying, "Do as you please." The shadow slowly extended its hand up to hers, as if scared. It was not playing its part very well. This was supposed to be a dream where nothing had gone wrong between them after all. But the illusion had begun to give way to harsh reality. The reality of having murdered the girl he loved. The reality of having been brutally abused and killed by the man she had leaned on for support. They had both once cared for each other in a very similar way, yet the end result was not love, but terrible tragedy. He was terrified to show someone affection with hands that had only ever brought destruction, and so before he did, he said, "I promised I wouldn't touch you without your permission." She knew it was just an excuse, though, that he was simply afraid, worried about putting his bloodied hands on her, that he might hurt her again, that he might corrupt her, that he had no right to. But he overcame all that, gently placing his arms around her, as if he had been waiting centuries for this moment. It was an embrace of many things: love for her, deep regret, and, most of all, atonement. He's wanted to do this. In his arms, she could feel everything he felt, since the day I locked his soul in that mansion. She thought back to that time, the unfathomable amount of time she spent as the witch, a force of pure hatred and vengeance. His was the last soul she entrapped, and when she did, he was little more than an amorphous shadow. It took many, many years for him to regain a human form, but even then, he was unable to move or speak. He simply wailed something incomprehensible at her again and again. At the time, I thought he was saying how much he hated me. But she was wrong. He had simply wanted to atone, but he had no idea how. Look at you, a grown man shaking like a fawn. As the shadow embraced her, it trembled, sobbing loudly into her shoulder. She had never seen him cry before, though she wasn't sure if this counted, since she could only feel it through the nebulous shade. Sometimes I can't tell if you have a heart of stone or of glass. Her entire body went limp. All the tension in her nerves released at once, and she felt like a massive weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Though I suppose I'm not terribly different in that regard. Unable to even speak my heart unless there's no one else around. Unable to face you except through this childish fantasy. Not even able to show any vulnerability. Maybe she hated to even entertain the thought, but perhaps they were more similar than she wanted to admit. Some time long ago, in the memory she had banished away, he told her that being close made people more open with each other, and it turned out he was right about that. She began to speak. Sorry. Oh, hold on, pick this up. Should really even drink water. I died. She began to speak, to tell him about the truth of how she felt, letting spill forth the raw pain within, holding nothing back. She told him how she despised him more than anything in the world, because he showed her happiness than the depths of despair, that she had no idea what to do with him, how she did regret some of her actions, such as misdirecting her anger. He was consumed by regret over what he had done to her, but he was not the only one who had regrets. As their minds and spirits intermingled, the true shape of her wounds grew apparent. He had hurt her, but she had hurt him too. She had blamed him not only for his own sins, but the sins of another man as well. And for that, she had laughed at him, cursed him, mocked him for trying to show something resembling care for another human being. Again and 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 again. I should have known better than anyone how much he was capable of caring, though. She thought back to the decisive moment. Knowing the truth now, she finally understood the full effect of the things she had said, to an even greater degree than Michelle had told her. She had told a man who had spent 3 years looking after her, coming to apply ointment to her scarred face, rain or snow, that she despised him with all her soul, that he had ruined her life. She had not been seeing clearly at that time, but he had been teetering on the edge as well, and her saying that had been the final push. It was my words that ultimately pushed you over the edge, wasn't it? How had it all ended up like this? Why did they have to hurt each other so much? What was the turning point that sent them so far off the path? He continued holding on to her for some time, pleading for a chance to make amends, spilling his heart, clinging to her like a little child. It was something he could have never done in life, or even in death. It was only after repeatedly crushing himself beneath overwhelming regret until he was mangled and hardly recognizable, that he was able to show her his weakness, that he was able to show her his tears. But it was far too late. It was all over. Nothing he asked for was something she could give him. No matter how much she begged, she could never stop hating him, could never forgive him. Fissures began to form in her spirit. Memories of her youth brought with them emotions long lost. Of the time she first directly acknowledged his kindness, it was a bitter, sweet, agonizing, suffocating, innocent feeling. Many, many ages ago, when I was still a child, I looked up to you. The sunrise she saw that morning carried on his back only seemed as beautiful as it did because he had shown it to her. She then grew to yearn the lost homeland he spoke of, admire his lofty dreams, and feel warmth in his hands as he spread the ointment. That was when the seed was planted, not only of the ability to feel joy, but love as well. I might have even had some fondness for you, and having said that, she knows the clear droplets rolling down her cheeks. Oh. After Michelle finished unveiling the truth, she shouted, "I cried for him," in a frenzy. And those tears she had shed contained all her feelings for him. On the day of her 12th birthday, that terrible, tragic day, she cried and told the man in the slave cart, "I'm sad because I didn't get the chance to show my gratitude to people very dear to me." And that was true. She was grateful to not only the young slave man, but the girls of the brothel as well. She had wanted to open up to them, but the larger portion of her tears were for just one person. She cried for him. She cried for the man who had spent so long trying to help her. She cried because she had not been able to thank him. She cried because she believed him to be dead. She cried for him then. So who did she cry for now? Were these tears for him as well? Were they for herself? No. They were for both of them. Decided to let the illusion continue on a while longer. She knew it was foolish. She had mixed feelings about being here and interacting with him as she had when she was younger. But she had softened up enough to not simply ignore the warmth it also made her feel. She had found it in herself to accept the seed of kindness sprouting within her. She had found it in herself to acknowledge how he felt. That she would use the dream to lead him to his next destination, under the guise of him holding her hand and leading her out of the claws of this foolish fantasy, to be released once and for all. She would guide him back into the void, that boundless sphere of fate, so that he may live again. They set off through the fields of waving gold. She squeezed her eyes shut, envisioning the young man she once knew. And when she opened them again, he was there, holding her hand and smiling softly at her. "You know, Jacopo, I really hope we don't ever cross paths again. Nothing good could possibly come from us meeting in the next life. I'm tired of having to deal with you. I hate you, and I pray I never have to see you again. But should you wish to see me, and should that wish take priority over my own, promise you'll treat me well. And if you can manage that, then Finn, okay." Well, that was soft. Soft and warm. Better treat her okay. Jeez. But not too much. Not that much. When lost. Oh no, Master. I was wondering if I could ask for some time off. One autumn afternoon, a young maid stood in Jacopo's study requesting a vacation, effectively signaling her intent to quit. Okay. Oh. He lit a cigar with practiced motions, took in a deep breath, and then blew the smoke out in a long, slow stream. Again, he thought, making sure not to let it show on his face. "What's your reason?" he asked. "Not satisfied with how you've been treated? I feel like we've been quite generous." "Oh, no, not at all," she said. "In fact, you have been much better to me than my previous house. I have no complaints about the treatment I have received." "Then why? If I knew you would quit so soon, I never would have hired you in the first place. But you've just started showing some improvement. Now all that time and money has gone to waste." "I'm sorry. I'm asking for a reason, not an apology," he said, his voice a mixture of exhausted, irritated, and scolding that only made the girl recoil further. He let out another heavy sigh. Are kids these days all this soft? Christ, he thought. Another complaint to add to the mountain built up and locked inside. "It's because, out with it. You know I don't like it when people aren't straight with me." The young maid looked up at her master apprehensively. His dark brown eyes seemed to pierce straight through her soul, making her feel like she was being squeezed from the inside out. Other maids had told her he was a lot softer than he used to be, but she couldn't imagine that at all. He was a rich, unmarried, testy man in his 30s. Everything about him was terrifying. And despite that, she was willing to face up to him and beg to quit because there was something even worse in the mansion. "The head maid scares me." Jacopo raised an eyebrow. He had been expecting her to say he scared her. "Did the head maids do something to you?" he asked. "No, she didn't." "Then why?" Ash fell from Jacopo's cigar, his irritation levels were rising. The young maid looked up at him, fear in her eyes. Are you not scared of her too, Master? Her appearance never changes at all. The past few years, there had been an increase in maids quitting for vague, non-specific reasons, and he finally had his answer. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, he was 22 years old, taking the first step to expanding his family's influence to the new world. Expectations for him were high, and the pressure was almost suffocating, but he was still an optimistic, ambitious young man at the time. He had to do this, and he had to do it right, and it was that determination that allowed him to maintain the softness in his heart beneath the tough businessman demeanor, which was probably what led to him hiring the mysterious maid he found in his newly acquired estate. She was there when he first stepped through the door, calling him master and showing him around the property. Then once she was done, she started working. Jacopo wasn't sure what to make of the woman, but she seemed to know what she was doing, and over time, his suspicion slowly transformed into respect. Where's your master? He asked. My previous master passed away, she said with a perfect smile. As the new owner of this mansion, you are my current master. Assuming that meant the previous owner had just made no arrangements for her to transfer anywhere after he passed, Jacopo decided to let her stay and work as she wished. It was the responsibility of those with power to give work to those without, and he felt some satisfaction in taking her in. And for more than 10 years, she did that work almost flawlessly. And as long as she wasn't causing trouble, he didn't see any reason to pry into personal matters. How long she had been here, why she worked as a maid, or who even she was, he never bothered asking her anything. But now, he was 35, and the maid still looked to be in her early 20s, just as she had the day he arrived. Jacopo leaned back into his chair, staring absently up at the ceiling, watching the smoke from his cigar waft upwards. The young maid who quit was long gone, probably living with her family. He considered introducing her to a new house, but he'd had so many maids quit on him he was running out of acquaintances to foist them on. There was a knock on the door. He leaned forward and said, "Who is it?" "It is I," came the voice of the head maid. He called her in, and the woman who stepped through the door was indeed identical in appearance to 30 years prior. 13 years. Jeez. 13 years prior. She floated gracefully to the center of the office, not making a single sound. He felt almost like he was watching a ghost. "One of the younger maids left today," she said, "so I wanted to discuss with you how we should proceed to redistributing the work. I leave that to you, as always. I'll take care of finding a replacement." "Yes, master," she said with a bow. Usually that would be the end of the discussion, and she would dismiss herself, but for some reason she stood there unmoving, her deep, unreadable eyes of jade locked on his. "What is it?" he asked with a frown, mildly uncomfortable. "Have you considered dismissing me?" she said, wearing the same faint smile she always had on. Her face was like a perfectly carved mask. "I know that the maids have been quitting because of me. They've seen what I look like, and so rumors have been going around. The young girls are especially impressionable, so they are more likely to believe in them. Have you considered dismissing me?" Jacopo tapped his cigar against the ashtray on his desk, then leaned back in his chair. He had considered it before, but he always came to the same conclusion. Every other maid could quit, and it wouldn't slow down work as much as losing you. "Oh my, you think quite highly of me." "I know a capable worker when I see one, and you're more than capable. Well, sometimes I wonder if you've been doing this job for hundreds of years." "Oh, my," she said, her smile widening. "You jest. If I had been a maid for hundreds of years, that would make me a ghost." "Well, aren't you?" he almost said. 5 or 6 years ago, he might have been able to chalk it up to good makeup, but 13 years wasn't something you could just hide like that. Jacopo didn't like to talk of ghosts or the supernatural or any of that nonsense, but it had reached a point he simply couldn't think of any natural explanation. "Why don't we have a little chat? I'd like to get to know a little about you." Her eyes went wide at his proposition. It had been a while since he'd seen her make a face other than that pristine smile, but even her surprise seemed artificial. With her, only the most restrained of emotions came across as genuine. Is it going to rain tomorrow, Master? You have never shown an interest in me before. Indeed, you might want to set your overcoat out. Now, what was it you wished to know? What are you? He asked, not dancing around the question. The head maiden gave a little giggle in response. I am but a mere maid, Master. Yeah, that's about what I figured you'd say. Next, who was your previous master? He was a very precarious man, drifting between man and beast. Oh, what the hell is that supposed to mean? Doesn't sound like a very good master to me. Did he even pay you? No, sir. The house was in shambles at the time. He let out another long stream of smoke. What on earth was she speaking of? When he had bought the property, it was a little outdated, but otherwise in good shape. If he took her at that word, that would have had... If he took her at her word, that would have to have been at least 30 years ago. He wanted to press her further, but he knew she would just laugh and brush the question aside. So he took another puff of his cigar and asked, and who was before that? The father of 2 adorable little children. He was rarely at the house though, so his wife, son, and daughter served as my masters. They were a noble family and they treated me quite well. I didn't know nobility had lived here. You believe me, Master? Oh, so you realize it sounds ridiculous, do you? I understand that it may seem somewhat unbelievable to you, yes? Well, I'm not completely taking you at your word, that's for sure. This is just a casual conversation after all, and I know we're all prone to some embellishment. So, who was before that? The sibling's grandfather. He was the man who taught me how to be an a maid. He loved roses, and I would often go out and admire the flowers with him. Jacopo twitched at the word rose, a reminder of a great mistake he'd made years ago. He snuck a glance at the window, closed his eyes, and whispered, I see. Alright, he continued. Who was before that? Before him was... Her gaze drifted upward, and then a rift formed in her persona, barely perceptible, but it didn't slip past Jacopo's notice. She still wore that eerily flawless smile, but hair-thin cracks had appeared in her jade eyes, allowing a carefully hidden murkiness to seep to the surface. For a split second, she seemed to be wearied to her core, looking out toward a faraway land she could never reach. And then it was gone just as quickly. Before him was my dearly beloved, whose return I am still awaiting. And for that reason, I hesitate to call them my master. I'm terribly excited for their eventual return, though. Sounds complicated, he said. I won't pry any further. She gave a wide smile. It was best to just leave it at that, he thought. They weren't friends. She was a maid, and he was her master. Next question. And I don't know how I never asked you this before, Jacopo said, letting it hang in the air for a second. What is your name? Saying it out loud only emphasized how ridiculous a question it was. He'd had this woman in his hire for 13 years without so much as knowing her name. With every other maid, he knew their name, age, family history, and more before they even signed the contract. But her, he never had a contract for her in the first place, which was unthinkable for a man who didn't even allow himself to make the smallest of mistakes. He had no idea how he could have let this happen. The only explanation he could think of was some unnatural power diverting his attention from it. My. You can simply call me the head maid, as you have all these years. I'm the master of the house, and I'm telling you to tell me your name, he said in his unflinching business voice, to which she gave him the same smile as ever. And then, when she offered him the name she believed to be her own, the air in the room seemed to crack. My name is Morgana, master. Jacopo's eyes went wide. While he wasn't as prone to shouting now as he had been in his emotionally troubled 20s, that was enough to push him over the edge. No, it's not! He yelled, unsure why he was so certain. There was another crack in the air between them. He lurched out of his chair, the force sending it toppling to the floor. She, meanwhile, looked only mildly surprised. No! That name does not belong to you! Oh my, then to whom does it belong? She googled. Every second he spent in the presence of that stony smile felt like a knife to the heart. By any reasonable measure, she was in the right. He had no place to deny someone else their name. But deep down, he just couldn't accept that name as belonging to the head maid. Master, your hand. He looked down to see his fist clenched around a still-lit cigar. The faint smell of burnt flesh rose up from it, though he didn't even feel the heat. Jacopo threw the crushed cigar to the ground. He had no idea why hearing a single name had sent him into such a frenzy, and not having an explanation only agitated him further. I think that's quite enough conversation for one day. Oh, that's okay. Please just call me the head maid as you always have. Now, do excuse me, master, she said, and Jacopo could only watch in silence as she drifted out of his office. Wow, got him. Jacopo's wife's bedroom was on the second floor next to his own. Specifically the room she had used in the early days of their marriage. In response to the information shared with him by a good friend, which he trusted blindly, he had moved her to the first floor. And then, still unable to trust her, he had relocated her to an entirely separate building on the property. Her room on the second floor had remained untouched since her disappearance. Knowing she was sensitive to sunlight, he'd had heavy light-blocking curtains installed on the windows. And then, so the room didn't feel so gloomy, he'd had it furnished with white fabrics and light wooden furniture. And it was all still there. He included the room in the maid's daily cleaning routines. Daily cleaning duties, but many of them considered it a waste of time, so occasionally it would be neglected. In the past, he would have yelled at them for that, but now he just gave them stern reminders to do all their assigned work. Which worked, though he could tell they weren't pleased. No one actually believed his wife would ever come back. After losing everything at the age of 26, he had set out in search of his missing wife. Both with his own 2 feet, and by hiring private investigators to look for her all across the globe. But even after so many years, he had nothing to show for it. Jacopo was beginning to think himself that she would never be back. But he wouldn't give up for any reason. She had waited steadfastly for him, even after being broken mentally and spiritually, though he had an obligation to do the same. It wasn't worth much, but it was the least he could do for her, being the one responsible for hurting her so. He wished to have just one last chance, to see her again and atone for all the damage he had done. That was the only thing keeping him alive, now that he had nothing else. He stood quietly in his wife's bedroom. On the desk sat her phenakistoscope, yellowed over the years. He could still see her calling it her phenicus wheel with a gentle smile on her face. The same smile he had stolen from her and crushed under his feet. It's a pleasure to meet you. He could hear her voice as clear as the day they had gotten married. Hers was a soft, almost musical voice, the sound of which he could never forget. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Michelle. They first met on the day of their wedding in the waiting room. She was wearing a veil at the time, so it wasn't until they made their vows that he saw the brilliantly affectionate smile on her face. A perfect match for her name, he thought, which came from the Archangel Michael. There was no one for whom an angel's name was more appropriate. But now the pieces had come loose with the headmaid's earth-shaking proclamation, and they were coming together to form a different picture altogether. The day Jacopo met his wife, somewhere deep down he felt as though he had known her sometime long ago, that he had been searching for her that entire time, and he had wanted nothing more than to bask in the light of that smile once more, and he would do anything to make sure she never lost it again. He saw a vision of a forlorn graveyard he had never seen before, a young girl crouched before a makeshift headstone, turning back to look at him. Her smile, the same as the woman he had married. His eyes went wide, and he thought he was crying, but they were perfectly dry. He had long since lost the ability to weep. Was Michelle really your name? Jacopo's soul was bound by two sets of chains, weighed down by 2 great transgressions. He could feel them both distinctly. He understood how terrible the things he had done were, and that he deserved no redemption. A few days later, Jacopo was returning from an on-site inspection and decided to pass through the garden on the way. A woman with long black hair crouched before a small flower bed, practically blending into the night. Hearing her master's footsteps, she stood up, brushed the dirt off her skirt, and gave him an ever-flawless smile. "Good evening, master. What brings you to the garden this evening?" "I was looking for you," he said. "Oh my, you have not been yourself lately, sir. Is it love? Because I'm afraid my heart already belongs to someone else." "That's not funny. My heart's already taken too, and not by you." She giggled impishly. "You're quite right, master. You would never tell the object of your affection I was looking for you." "Hey, that's your boss you're talking to." Jacopo sighed, glancing over at the flower bed. The whole area had once been a magnificent rose garden, but he had ordered it destroyed 9 years earlier. Enough time had passed that he was able to grow out of his irrational hatred of flowers, though, and so it was the headmaid's efforts that had brought it back to life, though on a smaller scale for the time being. "I apologize for what I did to the rose garden," he said, which elicited a bewildered stare from her. His gaze still averted, he continued, "You were fond of the roses too, weren't you? You mentioned coming out to look at the flowers of one of your previous masters. A nobleman, right? And now that I think about it, you were the one who looked after the garden the most as well." The headmaid let his words hang in the air for a few moments, then gave him a quizzical look. What has gone into him, she thought. But... Giving it a bit more consideration, she understood. Oh, I didn't mean to... Oh, actually it's getting kind of cold. Giving it more consideration, she understood. She had had plenty of time to reflect on his mistakes, so perhaps an apology was not so surprising. She had grown so numb to the passage of time that she'd forgotten Jacopo was just a young businessman still getting his feet wet when they'd first met. So green that he had seen no trouble in hiring a mysterious maid who refused to talk about herself, eventually assigning her the position of head maid. Power influenced business relationships, restless nights, constant betrayal. The pressures of the life he'd chosen had corrupted him. And then, in the wake of a great tragedy, he had managed to rid himself of some of that corruption. But only after he had lost the two people to whom that change would matter most. "You need not apologize to me for anything," she said. "As a matter of fact, I bear some fault myself for failing to see the truth. I could have stopped you, master, and I could have prevented the destruction of the rose garden too." "You're just a maid," he said. "You were in no position to see anything I couldn't. I should have caught on to Maria's scheming sooner, and I should have trusted my wife. The truth I failed to see was not theirs. It was yours, master." "Mine?" "Yes. I failed to see the kindness and love in your heart." Jacopo glared at the smiling headmaid like she'd just told an offensive joke. "If that were true, I wouldn't have been so obsessed with money and personal gain. I wouldn't have killed my closest friend, and I wouldn't have abused my wife." "Were your monetary desires truly as selfish as you claim?" He clenched his teeth, turning away from her clear jade eyes. He felt like she was looking straight through him. "You wanted the money," she said, "for your homeland, your family, your friend, your beloved. Am I mistaken?" "Yes, you are," he spat. While it was true he had wanted money for all those things, they were not his only motivators. He'd also wanted it for the power, to put himself on top of the world, safe from anyone who would betray him. But eventually, money and power changed from the means into the goal itself, sending him far off the path. Had he simply kept his eye on his true objective rather than obsessing endlessly over how to protect himself, he could have done more for both Maria and his wife. The headmaid gave him a somewhat melancholy smile. "If you so insist, master, then yes, I am mistaken. Nonetheless, it is all in the past now, and neither of us can take back the choices we made then." Precisely. He could say it was all supposed to be for his wife or Maria, but what would that accomplish? Nothing. Allegedly noble intentions didn't excuse the kind of pain he had caused. He let out a short sigh, casting all those thoughts aside. I was looking for you because I need you for something. Yes? What can I help you with? He asked. He turned his gaze toward the mansion, staring up a tall, long, abandoned tower. It seemed almost radiant in the light of the dull moon. Come with me. When Jacopo purchased the mansion, it had already gone through repairs to bring it up to a habitable condition. There was just one area that remained conspicuously in disrepair. Initially, he was planning to have the strange decrepit tower demolished. There was no point in having it repaired only to sit unused, so he wanted to replace it with something actually useful, like a storeroom. But for some reason, which he still didn't understand, he could never bring himself to destroy the tower. The entrance to the tower was at the back of what he called the Second Great Hall, a mostly unused hall near the back of the property. There were rumors among the maids about strange sounds and ghosts and blood dripping from the ceiling, going as far back as when Maria was still alive. Back then, he recalled telling her it was all nonsense, that he had no interest in you women's little ghost stories. But the truth was, something did seem off about the hall. Not in a frightening or unsettling way, though. Being there, he felt smothered with guilt and shackled with sorrow. So he avoided going to the Second Great Hall as much as possible. He hadn't even had lights installed in the hall, so stepping through the door felt like entering an entirely isolated realm of darkness. The couple and the headmaid each carried oil lamps to light their way through the hall. At the far end stood the door not opened in countless years. Just an ordinary wooden door, though, with a simple lock, not a heavy metal one with a complicated 3-key lock. As he unlocked the door with his master key, the headmaid whispered, "Why did you bring me here?" He considered following it up with, "Were you too scared to come on your own?" But even she couldn't bring herself to make light of things in the tower's presence. "Started paying more attention to you recently, after the last maid quit. And I noticed when you're not focused on something, you're looking towards one of the two places. The former Rose Garden or this tower. So I thought it would be best to bring you with me when I came to see the tower." "I see." The inside of the tower was black as the abyss, even darker than the hall leading to it. The light from their 2 oil lamps revealed a long, long spiral staircase leading up. Something stirred in the long frozen heart of the headmaid at the side of the staircase. Jacopo set a foot on the first stair, pressing down on it hard in several places. It let out low creaks under his weight, but it didn't seem to in danger of breaking. That said, it was still an abandoned tower at night, and nobody knew they were here. This was a terrible idea that could go wrong at any time, and he knew it. Watching him slowly climb the stairs, the headmaid's chest grew tight. For an instant, she wasn't seeing him, but someone else. They were holding her by the hand, running up and up and up and up. No, don't remind me. Do not remind me. Oh, I pressed circle accidentally. Whoopsies. I was like, I'm just, why did you want to see the tower? Yelling yawns. Oh lord. She said, trying to bring herself back to the present. Hell if I know. She tilted her head. He almost never acted without a clear reason. All I do know is, I got the strangest feeling I would find something about myself here. I see, she said, putting on a smile. I too have a strange feeling that I will find something of myself here. Climbing the decaying staircase was a long, arduous process. Every so often they passed a window carved out of the stone wall. The light from the moon illuminated the path before them, guiding sinner and prisoner ever upward. After more revolutions than the headmaid was able to count, the end was finally in sight. But there was one final obstacle before they could reach the door at the top. The next section of the staircase had collapsed. Ah! Shall we head back? The headmaid asked. If they were to attempt to proceed, one of them would undoubtedly slip and take a fall straight down to hell. Surely Jacopo would realize there was no way forward and give up. But she was wrong. Leaning against the stone wall for support, he placed his right foot on what little remained of the next stair, Then he carefully guided his left foot to the next. Several slow, meticulous steps later, a chunk of stone gave out under his weight, tumbling downward into the abyss. But even that was not enough to stop his determined procession. She watched him in silence. She was not afraid that he might fall, however, because if that were to happen, then that simply meant he was fated to die here. It was an insignificant detail to her. As long as she was able to wait for her beloved to return, nothing else mattered. But he made it across the collapsed region unharmed. It seemed the mansion was not ready to be rid of him just yet. He turned around, shining his oil lamp over the gap. You're free to wait here. You're free to wait here. No, she said. I will accompany you. She then gracefully lifted her skirt off the ground and followed the same crumbling path across the chasm he had. When she finally made it across, he gave her a smug smirk. Damn, and here I thought you were going to float across like a ghost. I guess you really are alive. To which she responded with a little smile. They resumed their climb, soon reaching the top level of the tower. Beyond a door half rotten away stand a chamber with a single window high upon a wall. Through it shone a pillar of moonlight. The two of them entered the chamber, proceeding to the center of the room. The air inside was far colder than the autumn night they had left behind. It chilled them both to their bones, to their souls. Jacopo stood in place, gazing up at the window for some time. Then he walked up to the stone wall, dropping to his knees in front of what appeared to be nothing at all. He traced the irregular surface with his fingers, his hand slowly forming into a fist and dropping lifelessly to the hard floor. You could hardly see a trace of the powerful, wealthy businessman he was in that slouched form. He seemed so much smaller, on the verge of withering away. Did you find that something about yourself here? She asked, her voice carrying well in the cold, empty chamber. Yeah, he said, his voice shaking. There was far more contained in that single syllable than she could ever hope to discern. For a moment, she thought he was crying, but from the glimpse she caught of his face, his eyes were dry, though he looked pale as a ghost. She stepped toward him, gently placing her hand upon his back. And then she spoke, breaking her personal vow to remain an observer. You wish to end your life here. I can offer you my hand. The man spun around to face her. There was neither anger nor surprise in his eyes, though. Well, Remy being baby. Giselle were like, I can kill you right now. Be right back. Oh. I'm back. Wait, can you sit down? Hold on, no. Yeah. Well, Remy's awake now. You're more prone to tantrums. Oh. Okay, I'll see how much I can read without Remy being a baby. What's happening? Oh, if you wish to end your life here, I can offer you my hand. The man spun around to face her. There was neither anger nor surprise in his eyes, though. Why would you say that? I do not know, she said. Seeing you there on your knees, the words simply came out. I felt as though that was what you had wanted. Oh, Remy. Sir, please sit down. Please just sit and just go back to sleep. Oh man. Ugh. Okay. She lowered herself to her knees as well, so their eyes were at the same level. He flinched, but did not avert his gaze from hers. You're right, he muttered, barely audible. There was a time when I did want that. Long time ago. But still, I descended those stairs. I couldn't let myself just toss aside what I had sacrificed everything to attain. Even knowing there was only suffering to be found at the bottom. That's exactly why. I had to own it. Just like I have to own my mistakes now. I see. Then I shall observe and see where this path takes you. What a wretched man, she thought, smiling. She was an experienced enough maid to know to keep that thought to herself, though. And she herself was also a wretched woman, who had wanted to die alongside her love at the top of this very tower. But in her broken mind, those memories had been transformed into a fairy tale. Full moon had begun its descent by the time they left the cold chamber. At the collapsed section of stairs, Jacopo crossed first, as he had going up. The headmaid then made to follow after him, but was instead greeted to his hand extended across the gap. She tilted her head. Obviously, he was offering her assistance in crossing, but she had made it over with no difficulty the first time, so she couldn't understand why. Not to mention, the master of the house had no obligation to help a lowly maid. But bathed in the glow of the moon, her hand stretched out to take his, before she realized what happened. They had both lost those they cared about most, and when their fingers touched, He saw a bright-spirited young woman with an infectious smile, and she saw a kind-hearted and sometimes sarcastic young man. Giselle and the slave, vestiges of their long-forgotten selves, bursting forth for the tiniest, most insignificant of moments. Michelle, to tell you the truth, I wanted nothing more than to descend these stairs with you, hand in hand. Morgana, to tell you the truth, I wanted nothing more than to go back to those days when I could still take your hand. By the time the headmaid had made it across the collapsed stairs, the shadows of their old selves had disappeared without a trace. Only the maid who always wore a smile and the forlorn businessman remained there in the tower. A faint connection had formed between them, though, a shared isolation and emptiness, and empathy as similarly damaged souls. But that too would fade in time, their connection as fleeting as an autumn night. With him leading the way, and her following behind, they descended the spiral staircase together. And what about you? He asked. Were you able to find that something about yourself here? Yes, she said. I believe I did. But I fear it will slip through my fingers again before long. You never struck me as the forgetful type. I have been for some time. I have no room for new memories anymore. Well, that's probably for the best, he said. It would be best if you forgot what you found here as well. Not a chance. My, she said. You're quite the intractable one. I could say the same about you. Say, Master, what is it? I want to tell you something, before I forget the things I felt tonight. Yeah? I was not terribly fond of you when we first met. That sounds about right. But that is not true any longer. Is that so? It is. The truth is, I thought you were creepy as hell at first. Didn't even want to look at you. That sounds about right. But that's not the case anymore. Is that so? Yeah, it is. That's cute. Oh. Yes, bittersweet is the more proper word to describe it as. 2. Pain. Yeah, pain. Beyond ending 4. Oh, what the hell was ending 4? Hold up. Oh, I saved. It's just, I wonder if it'll tell you, but I'll try to remember what that was. I think it should explain itself. How can you be sure that even now I still love you? Can you deny the possibility that I no longer yearn for you, but the white-haired girl? Can you deny the possibility that my love for you has transformed into hate? Farewell, Michelle. I don't know what the thing is, but I don't know why it says 2. What? This is... This is when Giselle was like, oh dude, and then you have the option to deny it, but then if you don't, I think that's the 4th ending. That, like, oh yeah, you probably do hate me, and she kills Michelle. Quote unquote kills, just pushes them into the void. In a brief moment of hesitation, Michelle had abandoned Giselle, leading to the worst possible outcome for the both of them. Both of them and one other as well, a young girl. The girl, however, remained oblivious to her fate. Are you sure you really wanted to let him go? Rolling back in a rocking chair before the fireplace, tracing her bottom lip with her skeletal finger. Wait, hold up. Did I go through that ending at all? I feel like there's like a lot to unpack there on that ending. Not sure if I went through all of it. Did I? I don't wanna damn clue. Because when I went on my own, going through some of the endings, some of them were a lot. This is for deny it, right? Maybe? What? Nope, that's remembering. Oh, fuck. Deny that I chew? Huh, where would that be? Yeah, oh. Wait, oh, it was. Oh, wait, it was that. What the hell? It was here. Wait, it was. Gosh, I'll be so far though. I don't think I read through it though. It's just it was it was before here. Pain, but I even be able to go back. Oh, fuck. I don't think I saved well enough before this here. Oh, fuck. Hey. I think this whole part is. What's this whole part? I don't got it down. But I feel like I saved there, but then I didn't continue reading through that on stream. Cause I was like, oh, that ain't right. Okay, this is when Michelle starts. Oh, I have to go through all this. Oh, I have to go. If I ever want to go back to that decision, I have to see him die again. You know what? I think I'm fine about that. But the denying the decision thing is when Morgana's like, oh, see, after all that, Giselle hates you. Goo gaga. Pain. Wow. You know, hold on. A better solution is go to my saves on the Steam file, because I have much better saves on there. Sorry, and that ending is. I just want to add context to this short story. Where is it now? I'm here. Oh yes, love seeing friend activity on Steam. Seeing a friend added fatamoru into their wish list. Good. You're very good. Excellent. Fantastic. Amazing. Beautiful. Gorgeous. As it should be. Gosh. Beat your game sound. We're doing with the game. What? I can't hear it. Wait, why can't I? Crazy. Why can I not hear it? hear it for some reason. Whatever, that's fine. Or can you guys hear it? I don't know why I can't hear it. That's absolutely weird. Huh. Funky. Oh, okay, no. I have headphones plugged in. Really got myself there. Like myself like a damn fiddle. Pranked! I pranked myself. God, I hate skipping through things. Cause it's like, I always think of that video of the guy like, oh, just skipping through a visual novel, just like Doki Doki, goo goo gaga. Shut the fuck up. Oh, I'm supposed to let go. Ah! Grab me! Actually, is it this point? Oh my gosh. Okay, I know I'm having a breakdown on stream right now. Deny it? Wait. Deny it. Okay. No. I know. No. I'm supposed to the translation, my dudes. This is a tragedy. Or wait a minute. No, wait, is it this part? Oh crap. I'm like being a fat ass clown right now. Okay, wait. Oh, Goo Goo Gaga. Wait. Oh, yes. I'm looking at a walkthrough and it's like, oh. So it's... Or was that right? But there are so many choices there. I'm just like, pee-pee poo-poo. Was it... Was this... Or was this saved like right before? Oh my lord. Oh my lord, just my saves are... Oh my lord, my brain! I really have to save there? They're here. They're here? That's enough. Fuck. The hell? What the hell? Oh. I'm going nuts. This is when they reconcile. Yeah. No. It should be the part before. Or did I live? Oh, Goo Goo Gaga. Okay. Sounds of dying. For real though. Ends up being this ending is just like poopy. Oh, yeah, okay. Can you deny the possibility I no longer yearn for you? The white-haired girl, can you deny the possibility that my love for you has transformed into hate? And I don't deny it. And she's just like, okay. I wanted to deny it. Well, she may have forgotten me, but what she felt still remains, as evidenced by her attraction to the white-haired girl, who had many physical similarities to me. Her feelings are still there. I sincerely believe that. Her arctic gaze caused me to waver for the briefest moment. Perhaps I only wanted to deny it for my own selfish reasons. It was only a few short seconds, but those seconds decided it all. I don't remember if I did that. I don't remember! I don't know if I finished all the way through! That's the thing! I feel like I just stopped in the middle! There's only a few short seconds, but those seconds decided it all. Farewell, Michelle. She slides her slender fingers down my neck, then gently shoves me back. Giselle! You did? I don't remember! Say, okay, well... Read the doo-doo. Love me. I think I'll understand. If you hate someone, you could change them down and torture them for all eternity. I do not hate him. Why did you so push him? Okay. Pretend none of that happened. Oh! Look! Okay. That was 1-2 pain. Guess that's... I don't know why they're linked together, but I guess we'll see. In a brief moment of hesitation, Michelle had abandoned Giselle, leading to the worst possible outcome for the both of them. And one other as well, a young girl. The girl, however, remained oblivious to her fate. Are you sure you really wanted to let him go? The girl leaned back in a rocking chair before the fireplace, tracing her bottom lip with her skeletal finger. Her face was covered in hideous scars, a fitting look for the witch of the cursed mansion, but it was her devilish smile that left the strongest impact. The maid, who now remembered she was Giselle, was putting kindling on the fire, a task she had done countless times over hundreds of years. But this time, the circumstances were slightly different. Yes, I am sure. Giselle looked up at the witch, distraught. Her already unnaturally pale face was almost entirely devoid of color. Just moments earlier, she had banished the man she loved. She had cast Michelle's soul back into the void, setting it off with a wish that he would never find his way back to the mansion. I see, the witch said, still running her finger across her lip. I don't think I'll ever understand. If you hate someone, you should chain them down and torture them for all eternity. It was the perfect opportunity to trap his soul. I do not hate him, Giselle said, causing the witch's bony finger to come to a sudden halt. The witch raised an eyebrow perplexed, but it was hidden in the shadow of her hood for no one to see. Oh, is that so, my dear? After everything you said, I simply assumed. I could never come to hate him. I could never want to see him dead or tortured. As she spoke, the look of dejection on Giselle's face deepened. However, there seemed to be a hint of relief beneath it, which the witch couldn't comprehend. Uh-huh. Then why did you say what you did? The witch extended her skeletal finger toward Giselle. Giselle sighed, saying, I don't think you would understand. Sometimes you kept your distance from someone because you loved them. You sent them back to the moral realm to live a normal life away from you, an undying apparition, because you loved them. You never wanted them to set foot in the cursed mansion again because you loved them. The witch would never understand those desires. She would never understand telling someone I don't love you because you love them. And she would never understand lying to push someone away because you love them. Probably not, the witch said. I'm not particularly interested in understanding either. It doesn't matter what happened in the interim. In the end, nothing's changed, has it, my dear? You are still my darling, devoted maid. With enough time, you will once forget your name. You will once more forget your name. Giselle slowly closed her eyes. The witch was right. In time, the mansion would eat away at her until there was once again nothing left. However, she no longer felt any fear about losing herself again. Giselle had no one to wait for anymore, which meant she was free from having to despair about him never showing up now. She didn't regret her choice either. As she had shown Michelle the events of her own past, she had come to realize that she was no longer that person, that she was merely an unsettling shadow of the woman he had known, and she didn't want to subject him to that. It's for the best. Giselle repeated that phrase to herself again and again. A devilish smile rose to the witch's lips as she watched her gaze slowly sink to the cold floor. What a wonderful world this is, she said. She was in complete control of everything, after all. The cursed mansion existed outside of reality, an eternal prison where time held no meaning. What one soul perceived as a day could be a second or a year for another soul. The witch Morgana awoke from a long rest. She opened her eyes, and there was the fireplace crackling away. Before it knelt a woman with deathly pale skin, feeding the fire with kindling. Morgana had no idea where the maid got the wood. Oh, hello there. Good morning. The witch snorted. Good morning to you as well, my dear, Morgana said. How long has it been? Since when? Since you cast him out. Cast who out? The maid said with her usual smile, tilting her head. Which was all Morgana needed to hear to know what had happened. It's been long enough for you to have fully reverted, I see. Whatever do you mean? The maid asked. Oh, is this one of your riddles? When have I ever given a riddle? You're the one who likes to make everything you say sound mysterious, my dear. My, if you say so. Are you trying to agitate me? Of course not. Now, would you like to start your day with a cup of herbal tea? Morgana sighed. It seemed the maid had indeed fully reverted. She'd had this exchange every single time she woke up since the maid's mind had broken. And even though her own sense of time had dulled as well, having to answer the same questions over and over again was so frustrating. She was the one who had broken the maid's mind in the first place, so she also understood she brought this on herself. I've told you this again and again, I don't need any tea. And what about breakfast? The maid asked. I don't need food either. As I've told you repeatedly. The maid pursed her lips into a little pout. Any food or tea you prepare is nothing but the product of a deluded spirit's imagination. Remy! And I would cast myself into the void before touching that, the witch thought, sighing. There goes Army. Then will you be doing your usual rounds of the house? The maid asked. I suppose, the girl said, gazing up at the dark ceiling. Her only real pastime was visiting the three souls trapped here and tormenting them. Sometimes with words, sometimes with visions of the past, and sometimes with her own two hands. Gradually, bit by bit, she chipped away at their souls. As master of the house, it acted to serve her will, and that influence was especially powerful while it existed outside time, which meant she could do almost anything she pleased. And she had taken full advantage of that ability to torture the souls of the flaxen-haired boy, the beast-like swordsman, and the monstrous lord. She was more than willing to spend the rest of eternity exacting her revenge on the three of them. That said, she felt things were getting a bit repetitive, and with Michelle banished, there was no longer any hope of outside entertainment, which left her the only one with the power to mix things up. It might be time to send them out again. The maid blinked at her, perplexed, but of course she couldn't understand. She didn't know about the three souls imprisoned here. Are you going to release something from the mansion? The maid asked quizzically. I would never, the witch said, cackling. They've been placed under a powerful curse, a wish of destruction and reconstruction, and I'm going to begin that process again, have them live their third lives. Oh, I can't wait to see what terrible ends they meet this time. Aren't you excited, my dear? Yes, very much so, the maid said, smiling as though she hadn't understood a single word. The witch jumped to her feet, giddy with answer. Imagining the miserable, bloody futures the three terrible men would surely meet had fixed her mood in an instant. They had to suffer for all eternity. They had to endure a fate worse than death. They had to pay for their sins. Over and over and over again. Morgana first went to visit the flaxen-haired boy, whose soul was imprisoned in the rose garden. As she approached the double doors, they opened on their own, the rusty hinges letting out pained shrieks. On the other side lay a colorless, withered garden, a sad shadow of its once brilliant, colorful splendor. Of course, the witch felt no heartache over the garden's state of decay. A boy's shadow knelt on the ground, almost entirely encased in a briar patch. It was wispy and barely managed to retain its human form. Arms wrapped around his head, he muttered endlessly to himself. It's not all my fault. I can't take this anymore. Someone, get me out of here. Morgana stuck her chin out, looking down on the pathetic creature before her. Her last time here, he had been a bit more coherent, but now he seemed to be hardly there at all. The flaxen-haired boy's punishment was to relive the day that started it all over and over again. He had to watch dozens of people die during the Harvest Festival celebration, including his own sister. And now that he'd finished his second life as well, she made him watch his mistakes from that as well. Such as the time he called his sister disgusting and pushed her away. The very same sister he betrayed the lakeside witch for. I never could have known that would happen. Just wanted a normal life. Someone, please get me out of here. Would you like me to set you free? The witch asked. Only then did the shadow notice her presence, looking up at her with his featureless, empty face. What? The witch's smirk grew wider. I said I'm thinking of releasing you. If the flaxen-haired boy had any strength left to think, he would have realized this was all a trick, not a sudden display of kindness. But all he could see was an opportunity to escape, and he was going to take it. But please, let me go. He didn't even so much as wonder why. The only thing that registered in his feeble mind was the word free. Nothing else mattered as long as he could escape this place. The witch's devilish smirk widened even further. Very well, then I shall deliver your soul to its rightful place. You are very fortunate to have this chance to return to the mortal realm, my dear. Thank you so much for your forgiveness. A contorted smile rose to the flaxen-haired boy's face. He then whisked away into nothing, leaving behind only a small breeze to rustle the witch's robe. It took all her strength to not burst out laughing. Thank you for your forgiveness? That was brilliant. She hadn't said a thing about forgiving him. Farewell, Mel, the witch said, tracing her lip with her bone finger. We'll meet again soon, she said. The witch's parting words this time were not until our souls crossed paths once more in the boundless sphere of fate. Because she hadn't released him from the curse, so his fate was still bound to her, even as he began life anew. And so long as he remained subject to the curse, so did the soul of the girl who meant so much to him. Next, the witch went to visit the swordsman. His soul was imprisoned in a cellar from which the stench of blood and flesh emanated. After losing his mind, the twisted killer began destroying everything in sight while howling in some incomprehensible tongue, perhaps his native language, perhaps not a human language at all. The witch was, in truth, not looking forward to this visit. While the cursed mansion was indeed her domain, her own little realm of the dead, she was still just a regular soul herself. If he were to catch her off guard, he could very well damage her soul beyond repair. The witch held the greatest grudge against the barbaric lord, but she remained the most cautious around the swordsman. With an exasperated sigh, she opened the cellar door. And, exactly as she expected, a barely humanoid beast leapt at her the second she did. Stop this instant! She shouted, pointing a bony finger at the beast. In the realm of the dead, it was willpower and not physical strength that ruled, which meant that while the witch had been a helpless girl in life, she was the most powerful being in this domain. At her command, the beast froze mid-motion, a katana held high above his head. He stared wide-eyed at the small girl standing before him, beads of sweat forming on his neck. Blink. The beast shouted something in some inhuman tongue. The witch glanced around the cellar. It was littered with corpses, bloodstains on every surface. Perhaps among the bodies was even the woman he called his tether. Oh no. The witch turned her golden eyes back to the beast. In life, she had been terrified of this man. So scared that she had resorted to opening her door for the flaxen-haired boy, hoping to ask for his assistance. But now, there was no fear. Only glee at having him entirely under her thumb. How would you like it if I returned you to the realm of the living? She asked with a devilish grin. The beast stared at her blankly, his form shifting into something faintly more human. You're still torn between your two greatest desires, aren't you? You thirst for blood, and yet you crave a quiet life at the same time. You've already fallen once, lived as the beast, but that wasn't enough to satisfy you. So perhaps the only way to quench your thirst is with the other desire, peace and quiet. And I'm offering you another chance to have that. Do you mean it? Shadow's hands were trembling. It took the witch everything in her power to not start cackling at the sight. That aberrant killer shaking like a lamb. Yes, I mean it, she said with a smile. The katana fell from the beast's hands, letting out a loud, high-pitched clang when it hit the hard floor. As the sound echoed in the cellar, it sounded almost like 1,000 ghosts screaming. So you do want to go back to being a man after all. The shadow dropped his head in a crude imitation of a nod. A hideous beast and his most benevolent savior. It was a scene that could have easily taken place between him and the white-haired girl in his second life. Of course, the witch's intentions were nothing like hers. And by the witch's mercy, the beast was freed. With his disappearance, the countless bodies stacked up in the cellar vanished as if they had never been there. Only the smell of blood remained to remind her of the carnage. The witch then burst out laughing, unable to hold it back any longer. Oh, that was brilliant! Do you really think you'll ever be able to find peace? No, you'll just kill whoever holds you back and descend into madness, no matter how much you resist. And this time, you're going to turn everyone on you and die a sad, miserable, gruesome death. Her cackling echoed in the cold cellar for some time. Final stop was to see the man who she despised more than anyone, the Lord, that monstrous savage. The mere thought of him filled her head with a pitch-black rage. He had ruined her life and tainted her soul. He was the cruelest and most barbaric of all of them. He held disgusting blood Sabbaths, turning a saint into a spectacle. The witch despised all three men, but her loathing for the Lord, the ultimate root of her suffering, was far, far greater than the other two. She made her way to the den on the second floor. Cigarette smoke seeped out into the hallway, a smell as sad as the man waiting inside. When she opened the door, a cloud of smoke escaped, and only then was she able to see inside. Sitting on the edge of the billiards table with his head drooped was a third shadow, again barely able to maintain a human form. A few seconds later, he noticed the witch's presence and stumbled off the table, shuffling precariously towards her. He extended a hand for her in grief and overwhelming regret, but the witch only saw it as a threat. He was trying to hurt her, as he had done so many times in life, to save himself. "Don't you dare touch me," she said, causing his hand to freeze in the air. It formed a chasm between them, boundlessly wide and unfathomably deep, one he would never be able to cross. "Rejoice, Lord," the witch said with a devilish grin. "I'm setting your soul free." The shadow just stood there, staring at her. He didn't rejoice at the news, and in fact seemed to be rather upset by it. He opened his mouth to try to say something, but only strained gasps escaped from his lips. The witch tilted her head. The other two had been thrilled to hear they were being set free, but she was not expecting this reaction. She said with a nod. "I see what it is. You realize that was a trick and that I'm really sending you out to your third doom. I suppose being the Lord for so long you would need a sense of danger." The man was desperately trying to communicate something to her, but with each attempt to use his voice, it only got less and less comprehensible. If he couldn't speak, then he would have to try something else. So he dragged his legs forward toward the witch. "You will never lay another finger on me," she commanded, pointing a skeletal finger at the shadow's feet. Heavy black chains, strongly reminiscent of those that had been used to seal the observation tower's door, appeared from the floor and wrapped themselves around his ankles, digging deep into his skin. The shadow fell to his knees and the sound of rattling metal echoed in the den. Oh, what a sorry sight. The former lord of a large territory and the head of a mafia family, on his hands and knees, utterly helpless. How does it feel being looked down on by a mere commoner? It must be absolutely humiliating. The shadow screamed, so mostly indecipherable, but more so than before. His intense desire to get through to her was beginning to show an effect. The witch cackled. glaring down at the pathetic creature before her. She knew how prideful a man he was. He was undoubtedly trying to assail her with curses and promises of vengeance, and oh, how delightful it would be to completely break him. Go on, my dear. Tell me how much you despise me. Take it nice and slow. You can do it. She crouched before the shadow, peering into his eyes. He didn't have a face to read an expression from, but she could still feel his desperation. He groaned and grunted until finally he was able to form words. I want to make amends. The witch froze. It took her several seconds to comprehend what he had just said. He just asked to make amends. The Lord, the man who had held those dreadful blood Sabbaths, tortured slaves for fun, and was concerned only about satisfying his own desires, wanted to atone? For what purpose? I made you into a witch. I will do anything you want. I want to make amends. Shut up. The witch stepped back away from the Lord. He was rattled and her face contorted in confusion, luckily hidden by her hood. Right, this was just a ploy to escape from her curse. He was offering atonement in the hope that she would show him mercy. Well, he was a fool. She had no mercy to spare. The only thing she had in her heart was boundless hatred. Having regained her composure, the witch decided she would make him pay for attempting to worm his way free with an empty show of grace. She turned her gaze toward the shadow-cloaked ceiling and made a wish. In her mind, she envisioned the long sword the Lord had held above her head, and a few moments later, that very blade descended from the void. The time-worn sword was rattled to the floor beside the Lord. Raising her fleshless arm, the witch pointed at the blade with a smirk. If you wish to atone for what you've done, you will have to suffer the same pain as I did. Oh, hold up, I'm gonna be right back. I'm dying. Hello? Oh. The poop dimension was merciless, but I live. The time-worn sword rattled to the floor beside the Lord, raising her fleshless arm, the witch pointed at the blade with a smirk. You wish to atone for what you've done, you will have to suffer the same pain as I did. Take the blade, and with it, sever your own left arm. And should you refuse, that proves you a heartless tyrant, only capable of hurting others, she meant to say, but couldn't finish. What? The sound spilled unbidden from her lips as a massive shadow made a thump against the dense carpet. Jet black liquid spurted from his left shoulder, staining the area around him. He hadn't even hesitated. What next? Oh, he just did it. Oh, Kopo. The shadow plunged his bloody sword into the ground, leaning against the hilt for support. He was breathing heavily from the pain, but still he asked for more, knowing a single arm didn't compare to the agony she had been made to endure. The witch stared at him, flabbergasted. What on earth was happening? Was this the kind man the Lord was? No, forget that. Regardless of whatever he was doing now, he had still locked her in the observation tower and killed her. He was a brutal, savage murderer, and nothing changed that. He had to be. He had to be. What do you want me to do next? What will bring you relief? Morgana. Silence! The witch's mind was a mess. Something seemed wrong, but her soul refused to let her see what. Pain that she had long since buried was drifting back to the surface. As anger and hatred bubbled furiously in her gut, she twisted her lips into a smile and proclaimed, "Very well then. As you wish, I will let you experience the full extent of the pain and helplessness I was made to suffer." And so she put the Lord through all the pain and suffering and despair she had gone through in life, covering his body and wounds from head to toe and draping the den in a thick layer of black blood. It was the witch's very own blood Sabbath. The black shadow lay in a twisted mound in the center of the sea of blood, occasional strained gurgles the only sign anything remained inside. He had endured the entirety of her 16 years of life in the tiniest fraction of that time, and as a result his soul was on the brink of disappearance. The witch was breathing heavily as well. In the process of administering his punishment, she had had to relive it all as well, creating brand new wounds on her soul. It had been centuries since she had last been hurt by her past. "That's enough," she said. "I'm sending your soul back out into the world so you can begin your third life, and your third tragedy. I will never let your suffering end." Coughing out blood, the shadow lifted his head, shaking it weakly. He didn't object to his suffering, only doing it in the mortal realm. It had to be here with her where she could see it. He had so much he wanted to say, but only the strength left in his lips to put one sentiment into words. That he wanted to atone, of course. That was the only thing he truly desired. The witch bit her lip. These incomprehensible feelings he kept dragging out of her were driving her mad, and the very fact that she was unable to retain her composure was only a source of further agitation. "Are you incapable of saying anything else? If you're capable of feeling remorse, why would you do any of that to me in the first place? Why did you hold all of those blood Sabbaths? Why did you make a spectacle out of me? Why did you torture your slaves for fun? Why did you call me a witch? Why did you lock me up and murder me?" He likely wanted to tell her she was wrong, but because not everything she had said was false, he couldn't. And he didn't have the strength or clarity of mind to explain it in detail. So all he could do was cling to his self-destructive wish for atonement. "I will never be able to understand you, Lord." The witch's mental state was beginning to shift again. Not for the better, though. The only person capable of untangling the massive knot that had formed was no longer around, which meant it would only continue to get more and more tangled. And she was starting to think she'd rather be rid of him entirely than have him suffer for all eternity. The longer she kept him around, the more chances he would have to beg to make amends. But she was done with that. She was done with the Lord's nonsense, and she was done feeling like such a mess because of him. "Okay then, as you wish. This wasn't part of my plan, but I'll let you have your final atonement. As she spoke, she bent down and picked up the sword with her skeletal hand. By giving me your head. He didn't object, and he didn't try to run. Instead, he pushed himself up with his right arm, dropping his head and exposing his neck for her. Morgana looked down on him with disgust. She tightened her grip on the sword, pretending not to notice the faint trembling in her hand. Farewell, Lord. May your soul be forever extinguished from this world. With those words, she ended the Lord's life once and for all, and with his death, the truth scattered into the wind. Morgana's robe was heavy with black blood. She was exhausted. She thought having her revenge would take a huge weight off her shoulders, but instead, she just felt lethargic. She wanted to get back to the warmth of the fireplace and go down for another nice long sleep, but when she opened the door to the hallway... Have you finished your business? She came face to face with the maid, her jade eyes glimmering unnaturally. Morgana took a half step back. What was she getting spooked for? She was the most powerful being on this domain. She was in complete control. The witch gave a little humph to mask her momentary stumble, then said, Yes, I've finished. Now tell me, is the fireplace going? I'm rather tired and would like to rest. But of course, Morgana. I put fresh kindling on the fire not long ago. It would be nice and warm for your nap. Very well. Morgana lowered her gaze and made to leave the maid behind, but then she realized something seemed very wrong. How does the maid know my name? A chill ran down her back. The maid's mind was so broken, she would never call Morgana by that name, because she believed it to be her own. Cold jade eyes remained fixed on Golden. A smile spread across the maid's lips. The witch could not, though. Are you... Giselle? If so, why? Why would she pretend to be mad if she still retained herself? What was her objective? Why was she wearing that unsettling smile if she was Giselle? Who on earth was she? For the first time, she felt something like fear for the maid, for Giselle. She was a witch, though. She was supposed to be the one everyone feared. She was the master of the house. She was the most powerful being in this tiny domain. So why did she feel like Giselle of all people had taken the upper hand? She had to have been imagining it. Giselle was her faithful maid, and she was an all-powerful witch. However, that dynamic only existed as it did because Giselle had Michelle to wait for, her one source of hope and her weakness. But now that he was gone, and Giselle no longer had any hope, would she really stay in Morgana's servitude for eternity? While you were asleep, I spent some time organizing my thoughts. Is that so? The witch said. It is. After Hayden's death, you told me of the 3 men who wronged you, and of your enmity for them. That may have happened, yes? And then you told me how you made a wish for them. A wish that they would undergo reconstruction and meet their tragic demises again. Yes? What of it? Something about it doesn't quite sit right with me. I have only heard of the events from your perspective, though, so I can only speculate on what it means. But a story told from one perspective is necessarily colored by that perspective. If the speaker believes something, it becomes true within that telling, regardless of the reality of it. I am quite familiar with this phenomenon, as I have fallen into its trap before. What are you implying? Are you trying to say I'm wrong about what happened to me? I cannot say, and the only one who could is no longer with us. Any chance we had of knowing the truth is now lost forever. However, unlike you, I was there with all 3 of them for their second lives. And in particular, my impression of the man in the third door who you refer to as the Lord does not line up with your depiction of him in certain ways. Would you really call him a heartless monster? Why wouldn't I? The witch said. You passed goblets of my blood around to noblemen like wine. Does that sound like someone who has a heart? Giselle didn't back down in the face of Morgana's intense glare. In fact, she took another step closer. Morgana was starting to feel like she was at a disadvantage, despite full confidence she was right. And what if you were mistaken about some fundamental detail? Mistaken? No, there was nothing to mistake. The Lord was a monster. He was the one when he drained her blood for feasts, And he was one when he locked her in the tower. That was the simple truth of it. Why then did she feel like her chest was in a Why then did she feel like her chest was in a vice every time she told herself that? Why had her hand shaken before killing him? And why on earth did her mind keep changing? Ooh, my brain! And why on earth did her mind keep imagining him begging to atone as someone completely unrelated? For a heartbeat, a vision of that lonely graveyard swelled up in her mind. Standing there was a slave man whose name and face and voice she had long forgotten. The one who had taught her kindness. Chose not to stop you though, Giselle said. Why do you think I did that? Enough games. Out with it already. What are you scheming? Oh, I would never. I simply wanted one thing. For you to lose everything as well. The witch glowered at Giselle, who was still wearing the same lonely smile. She had no idea what that inscrutable woman was trying to say. She had already lost everything. That was what had driven her to become the spiteful witch in the first place, drifting outside time for all eternity. Giselle placed a hand on the witch's cheek. Jade and golden eyes locked, mere inches apart. And there, the witch gazed into the eyes of another witch. You surrendered yourself to hatred, becoming a witch who brandishes curses. And I surrendered myself to solitude, becoming a witch who brandishes desolation. This is a world too painful to live in if you don't love solitude after all. No, there's only one witch, me. And why might you think that? Because I'm the one who started it all. I'm the one who created this mansion, and I am its master. I bear more hatred than anyone. Because, well, since this is part 2 from the last Jacopo Giselle maid talk, Giselle got some thoughts. I'm the one. As departed souls, we're formed by our will and our emotions. How do you know my despair, my sorrow, and solitude aren't stronger than the hatred that makes you? And then, with an unsettling cold smile that radiated pure emptiness, the smile of the true witch, she offered the girl one final thought. Can you be certain the lord you killed was the same lord? And with those words, that tiny, insignificant realm became devoid of even pain. Pain. Huh. I see? Wow. They really did that. Boy meets girl. Michelle! Died. Michelle was bored out of his mind. His family had always been very overprotective, but at the age of 10, he was still afforded a lot of freedom. He wasn't quite old enough to have to start acting like an adult yet, and in light of what fate had in store for him much later, this would turn out to be one of the happier periods of his life. Even as a child, Michelle understood his place within the Belanger family. He was obedient and did his best not to step on anyone else's toes, but bottling up his desires for so long put them at risk of blowing up. Especially on days like this, where there was an opening. His mother, who said listen to your mother, as though it were part of her breathing, just so happened to be out of the house. So he wanted to do something different, to let out all his pent-up boredom. He wanted to make this into a day he would remember. And since his mother had taken many of the servants with her, there was no one to get on his case if he acted out of it. However, he had no idea what to do with this newfound free time. It was just drifting past him, every passing moment, another moment wasted. Oh. I'll just have to ask George. He may have been a precocious child, but Michelle was still a child nonetheless, and he genuinely believed his brother would have some idea of what to do. If his oldest brother Didier had been around, Michelle could have gone to play chess with him or watched him train, but regrettably, only his eccentric middle brother was home. 10 days earlier, George had proclaimed he was going to paint a masterpiece. Michelle hadn't seen him since. Maybe he was dead. That would kinda suck. Michelle didn't want to have to deal with reporting a body. Though in all seriousness, his brother was probably just in his special place and had lost track of time. Michel made his way to his brother's room, a process that would usually involve running into half dozen servants, but today, the Belanger estate was quiet as a graveyard. He felt like humming as he walked through the corridors, but couldn't think of any songs. If only he wasn't so ignorant about the arts and recreation, and maybe he wouldn't be such a horribly boring person. But today, Michel wasn't in the mood for those kinds of depressing thoughts. He stood before the door to his brother's room, knocked timidly, and then let himself in. "Hey George, do you have..." he said, but he was unable to finish the sentence. His brother was splayed out on the floor like a corpse. He really had found a body. Michel stood in the doorway, frozen and useless like one of his brother's sculptures. The air in the room was stale from having been closed for so long. "George!" After several long minutes, Michel was finally able to use his voice again. He ran over to the body and dropped to his knees, shaking his brother's shoulders, on the verge of tears. This was his punishment for saying it would suck having to deal with a dead body. "George, please, come back to me! What happened?" Ah! The corpse lurched forward, causing a breeze that stunk of paint. Michel shuffled backwards on his knees, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would jump out of his chest. George gazed stupidly at his in-progress painting, heaving a heavy sigh. "Are you okay, George? Maybe you should get some rest." "Oh, didn't see you there, Michel." Michel wanted to disappear. He felt like an idiot for getting so worked up over someone only to have them see straight past him. "That's all you have to say? After worrying me like that?" "Huh? I was just sleeping. Nothing to worry about." "Your bed is for sleeping, not the floor." George chortled. "Did you need something?" "Oh, yes," Michel said. "Mother and most of the servants are out of the house for the day." "There's some kind of trouble?" "No, no trouble." George tilted his head until it was almost horizontal. A few moments later, he clapped loudly and said, "Aha! So you're bored?" He was right, but Michel couldn't bring himself to just say, "Yes, I'm bored, please give me attention." So he averted his eyes and said instead, "I would not say I'm bored, but it's just so rare for the house to be so empty, and George chuckled. "You're right," he said with an impish smirk. Michel braced himself, fearing his brother was going to tease him. "We all need a change of pace every once in a while. Some real excitement to mix things up. I've been running short on inspiration these last few days too." So he was not ready for what his brother said instead. Let's go out on the town," George proclaimed, at which Michel was positively bug-eyed. Now, this is a point that bears repeating. Michel's family was very overprotective of him, in part because he was so sensitive to his son, but mostly because he was a daughter of noble blood. He wasn't a vampire, so the son wouldn't kill him, but because of the circumstances of his birth, he was almost never allowed to go into the city. If he was lucky, he got to go down once a year, but always for some kind of business. The city was like a giant cave filled with gold and jewels, but guarded by a big, ferocious, poisonous dragon, and he could only ever see a little bit of it. So he was thrilled. So much so that had he been raised with fewer hawks watching over him, he probably would have broken into dance, and maybe even a musical number. But he knew how to restrain himself, and restrain himself he did. When they arrived at the capital's central district, it was much busier than Michel had expected. There were people everywhere, going every which way, doing anything and everything, and even more. Someone was shouting from a shop, trying to attract customers. Their voice was rough and deep and loud, nothing like the quietly refined voices of everyone at home. A cat sat perched atop a barrel, covered in filth, glaring at Michel with eyes that seemed to glow. His mother would probably hate this. Her anxiety was too strong. She would say it was too loud and unrefined, refusing to even set foot here. But Michel thought there was beauty specifically in the discord. George laughed merrily at the sight of Michel looking around in wonder. "Looks like we're in for even more excitement than we bargained for," George exclaimed. "Is it not safe here in the city?" "Oh, heck no it ain't. You let your guard down for 3 seconds and you're dead meat. Don't listen to anyone who says they have something good for you hear me? 9 times out of 10 they're gonna toss you into a big black cauldron and eat you right up. That's just how it is in the big city." "What?" Michel went pale as a ghost, and 3 seconds later George burst out laughing. He'd been tricked. Michel flushed bright red. His cheeks were getting quite a workout today. "If there's anyone I shouldn't listen to, it's you, George. I ain't lying, just playing a little joke, that's all. Only a little kid will fall for that." This dude. One of these days, Michelle was going to get George back, beat him at his own game. This, his brother said, giving him a quick wink. This is the excitement I was talking about. He placed an outstretched finger on Michelle's chest, right above his heart, and pushed gently. There's gonna be some real fireworks if anyone realizes who you are. He was right. Michelle's mother would tear his head off if she found out her daughter was wandering around town in commoner's clothing. He wore a battered brown robe instead of an elaborate dress, and his hair was tied up and hidden inside a hat. Oh, cute. At a glance, no one would clock him as a noble girl, but he still felt awkward and out of place, and people were more likely to notice that. George, meanwhile, had done this before, and he really owned the commoner look. If Michelle didn't know better, he would think his brother was a traveling troubadour or something. You really are a strange man, George. You just now figuring that out, kid? No, just... that's part of my charm. I hope one day I can be as confident as you. George was probably the only person in that house who considered trouble fun. If Michelle had asked one of the servants to help sneak him into the city, they would have certainly taken off running, shouting about how they didn't want to lose their head. As a boulanger himself, George would likely be allowed to keep his head, but even he wouldn't get off scot-free for this. Michelle was glad he had George here with him. He didn't say that, though. Partly from embarrassment, and partly because he knew he'd be teased for it. So, where should we go? Want to hit the pub, grab some cheap booze, and toss silver at the bar? Maybe we should ease into things. That's a lot to start with. It's not like I'm taking you to a monster's den. Just relax, it'll be fun. A pub is still no place for children. Come on, I may be a dunce, but I'm not dumb enough to take you to some seedy back alley joint. Most of the pubs along this main road are basically restaurants during the day. Some even have inns in them. There will be lots of very nice people. If you say so. Michelle was less comforted and more terrified at the prospect of there being lots of people, but part of him was still interested. Not to mention, he wouldn't be going alone. So he gave a hesitant nod. If you're scared, you can always hold my hand, George said. Forward march, my young soldier. Follow my lead. Michelle wasn't happy about his sprightly, airheaded brother playing him like a fiddle, but this was a battle his pride couldn't win. Holding onto his brother's pant leg, they set off down the bustling street together. But not for long. Michelle stood flummoxed. Flummoxed? The hell's that word? Perplexed, pretty much. Jeez, what a word. Flummoxed in the middle of the street. He looked left. No George. Oh god, right, no George. Had he gotten lost? No way. He had been right there just moments ago. There were just too many people around, and he'd lost sight of his brother for a second. He wasn't lost yet. Michelle was better than that. He would never get lost. But his pride couldn't change reality. They were on their way to the pub when George had run into a girl he knew and started talking. It didn't seem like they were going to finish anytime soon, so Michelle had decided to wander around and explore the area. Michelle! One thing led to another, and now he'd completely lost sight of his brother. Refusing to accept that he was lost, Michelle started chasing other people the same height and build as George. It's more of George's fault. Come on! Yeah, this dude. When one turned out to be wrong, he went after another, and before he knew it, he was well off the main road with no idea how to get back. This area was much quieter than the main street. Not being familiar with cities, Michelle couldn't tell if it was a good kind of quiet or a bad one, though. Maybe he just wandered up from the trade district to the residential one, or maybe he'd ended up in some back alley where no one could hear him scream. If the latter, he needed to get out of there, and fast. Back alleys were the home of ruffians and other unseemly types, after all. And who knew what they would do if they found out he was a noble? That, compounded with the fact that he was too shy to ask for help and too self-conscious to let himself be seen crying or even shaking, left him stuck there just biting his lip. Why did none of my books say what to do when you get lost? And soon enough, he was directing his frustration at innocent bystanders, but then he caught sight of a stout woman around his mother's age, watching him intently. 9 times out of 10, they're gonna toss you into a black cauldron and eat you right up. George's words played back in Michelle's mind. He knew it was a lie, and the woman appeared rather friendly and not at all like a child-devouring witch, but Michelle was all alone right now, so everyone seemed dangerous. He was like a high-strung cat. Michelle glared back at the woman, so she knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. And as soon as they locked eyes, she spoke. He couldn't make any sense of what she said, though. My, look at you two little sweethearts. Shopping together? You're so grown up. What? Two little sweethearts? Was she trying to disorient him by spouting nonsense so she could kidnap him while his guard was down and demand a ransom from his family? Hey, mister, came a voice as something tugged on his robe. He spun around to find a small girl looking up at him and sucking her thumb, evidently the sound of the voice. Who are you? She asked. No, who are you? He stared at her, flummoxed for the second time that day. My daddy got lost, the girl said. I think you mean you got lost. Are you lost too, mister? No, it's my brother who's lost. We're the same. My situation is nowhere near as bad as yours, thank you. Michelle listened to what the girl had to say, doing his best not to explode at her. She was apparently 3 years old and had gotten separated from her father while out shopping. 3 years old? What a baby! His hands were full enough trying to figure out what to do with himself. The last thing he needed was to have to look after a lost toddler on top of that. He really should have asked the woman for help as soon as he noticed her, but by the time he'd collected himself enough to do anything, she'd already said goodbye and disappeared. Unable to find her again, Michelle was stuck dealing with the calamity all on his own. He couldn't just leave her there either, as much as he didn't want to deal with it. Mister, yeah, good. He was the older one here, and he had to set a good example for her. So Michelle bent down to match the girl's eye level and said, Let's get you home. I'll help you find it. Can you remember anything near your home that might help us find it? Michelle asked. The girl for several minutes before shouting, Oh, I do! Perfect. What is it? Maybe this whole lost kid ordeal would be over sooner than expected. He let out a sigh of relief. A brown cat! Which immediately turned into a sigh of disappointment. Cats move, Michelle said. It has really mean eyes. Oh, forget about the cat already. Can you think of anything that doesn't move? I know. Monsieur Casimir is always sitting outside. No people either. Oh, why not? He never ever moves from his favorite spot. I need something easier to find, like a building or something. Oh, there are lots of buildings, the girl exclaimed. The lady next door has a big flower garden. They're really pretty and red. Not like that. No one's going to know about your neighbor's flower garden. There has to be something big that anyone would... Michelle realized he was getting genuinely angry and stopped himself there. The girl's eyes had gone wide and watery, and it looked like the dam could burst at any second. He closed his eyes and shook his head, disappointed in himself. Here he was getting mad at a 3-year-old girl who was just doing her best to answer his questions. Are you mad at me? She asked. No, I'm not mad at you. Michelle took a deep breath, letting it out slowly to release some of his frustration. He needed to adjust his expectations. She was just a little kid, and she wasn't always going to know the right thing to say. What am I supposed to do then? He'd been raised in almost complete isolation from the world, with only adults around to interact with. Even his brothers were a good deal older than him, so he'd never been in a situation where there were so many barriers to communication, and he was so utterly clueless as to how to handle it. Would he actually even be able to help the girl get home? Gems! Said the girl out of nowhere, interrupting Michelle's train of thought. She reached her soft, pudgy little hand up and patted his cheek with it, right beneath his eye, and when she froze, dumbstruck. For 1 second, she was on the verge of tears. The next, her eyes were glimmering inquisitively. What was she even talking about? Where did gems come from? This is just how little kids are, I guess. I wonder if I was like this at her age, too. Do your eyes hurt? She asked. Uh-huh. Why would they? Because you got gems in them. Oh, so that's what she meant. His red eyes. Michelle understood now, but he wasn't very thrilled about the topic. He didn't like the color of his eyes or his hair or his skin. It was all because of them that he had to be holed up his whole life. That's just what color my eyes are. There are no gems in them, and it doesn't hurt. Wow, they're so pretty! Pretty. Michelle blushed a little at the compliment, despite thinking just moments ago he would rather talk about literally anything else. He received compliments on his eyes often enough from his mother and the servants, but this was the first time one had ever felt genuine, with nothing behind it. When his mother said his eyes were pretty, she was envisioning him as an angel sent down to earth. When the servants did it, it was because of their status. They were never saying it about him and only him. But the girl, she was. There was no jealousy or pity or scorn or anything else to her words. She was simply excited about eyes she thought were pretty. I think normal eyes are much prettier myself, he said without a hint of sarcasm in his voice. Okay. Okay, let's go somewhere where there's more people to start with, he continued. Michelle stood up, hesitated for a few moments, and then extended his hand. The girl grabbed it excitedly, which made him feel like he was the only one anxious about the whole thing. I'll come with you, mister. You need someone to help you find your brother. You're the one who's lost, remember? Wait, mister? Right? Oh, Michelle just now realized that she had been calling him mister this entire time. He'd forgotten that George had dressed him up like a boy, saying it was safer that way. How was he supposed to feel in this situation? Upset that she'd guessed wrong? Embarrassed? Ashamed of himself for deceiving her? The emotion that welled up in his chest was none of those, though. Instead, Michelle felt something that seemed entirely inexplicable at the time, a mixture of joy and pride at someone finally acknowledging him for who he was. A faint smile spread across his face. Yes, I'm a boy, he said, letting each word linger on his lips. It felt so much better than any comment about his eyes. They wound their way down the streets, Michelle occasionally working up the courage to ask someone for directions, and after repeating this process several times, they finally made it back onto the main road. Michelle wasn't sure if it was the same road where he had gotten separated from George, though. The capital was massive, and it seemed like every other street was called Main Street. As they stepped out into the throng, the clock struck noon. The pealing of the bell brought with it another wave of people. They looked to be artisans of all sorts heading out for their lunch breaks. Apparently, this main street collected a bunch of workshops in it. The artisans were all big men and even bigger arms. Their profession was making things by hand, and you had to be well built to do the job well. Michelle found himself enchanted by the parade of muscles, following each new one with his eyes as they passed by. Do you want to be like them, mister? I don't know. I haven't really thought about my future much. Michelle grimaced. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about it, but that he didn't want to. He knew all too well that he could never be an artisan, or a knight, or even a painter. I kinda want to be a craftsman, the girl said. We can make anything they want. Girls can be craftsmen. Why not? Well, that was just how the world worked. Those were the rules and you had to follow them. End of story. Michelle was only 10 and he knew that. He knew what a girl's role was, and soon enough, she would come to know all that as well. That growing up meant giving up on your dreams. I'm not sure, actually. At first, he just didn't want to shatter a 3-year-old girl's hopes. The more he thought about it, the more dissatisfied he felt with the system too. Why didn't he get to choose how to live his own life? Why did he have to be stuck on this dark and narrow road his whole life? What would you want to make as a craftsman? Michelle asked to take his mind off his own dead-end future. The girl's eyes lit up. Leather sandals and bags, she proclaimed. That's quite practical. He had assumed she would say something more cute and frivolous, like toys and sweets, or something completely outrageous like the stars. So we can put them out. Put them out? Not put them on? Wait, was she? Does your family run a shop? Yep. Okay, so she was the daughter of a merchant, which meant they were probably close. The artisans' workshops and the merchants' shops were likely to be set up near one another. Michelle looked down to ask her if she recognized anything in the area, but before he could, she shouted, "Ah!" and let go of his hand, dashing into the bustling street. Hey, wait! If he lost sight of her now, he would probably never find the girl again. So he ran off after her, slamming into a large muscular man only a few seconds later. Watch it, the man shouted, his voice so powerful Michelle thought it might send him flying. His gut tightened. No one had ever yelled at him like that before, but he wasn't going to stop just because he got a little scared. He'd only met the girl earlier that day, and he didn't even know her name, but he was determined to get her back to her parents. Giving up now wasn't an option for him. The girl weaved through the crowds effortlessly, like a sprite out of a story. Meanwhile, Michelle was crashing into people every 3 steps and was beginning to fear he was actually making negative progress. At long last, he made it through the river of people and caught sight of her again. But what he saw made his jaw drop. She charged at an older man, latching onto his leg. The man looked down at her, his eyes narrowed as if he was frowning, or about to start crying. He was very clearly the girl's father. In addition to his relief at their reunion, he also found himself surprised at the father's reaction. His only image of a father was a strict and impassive man, not someone who would show so much concern and compassion for his daughter. His father cared more about putting on an appearance of strength than showing love for his family. He would certainly never cry over one of his kids. That would make him look weak. And Michelle had always thought that was just how fathers were. But there was nothing weak about the girl's father being so happy to have her back. "Are you the one that found my little pumpkin?" Her father walked over to where Michelle was standing, grabbed both of his hands, and shook them up and down enthusiastically. "Thank you ever so much. I just about had a heart attack when I saw she was gone. Oh, I'm so glad she's safe," he said, and then kept going and going until Michelle felt like his arms were going to come off. "You're welcome. That's enough." When the man finally let him go, Michelle's arms had gone numb. "I'm ever so sorry," he said, scratching his head in embarrassment. "I got too excited." The girl hanging off her father's leg like a koala said, "Don't get lost anymore, Daddy." "You're the one who got lost, Pumpkin," he said with a sigh. But he was too relieved to be angry at her, and his frown turned right upside down. Michelle let out a satisfied sigh at the sight of them. He'd completed his mission successfully, despite the trouble he'd run into along the way, and everything was all back to normal now. "So, did you bring her here all by yourself?" the man asked. Everything was all back to normal, in the sense that he was finally back at square one. He still had his original problem to deal with. "I was here with my brother," he said timidly, "but we got split up." "See? I knew you were lost, mister," the girl said. He wanted to say he knew exactly where he was, but he knew an adult would see right through him. So he stared down at his feet in shame, at which her father let out a hearty laugh and set a hand on his head. "We'll help you find your brother then. He's probably having a heart attack right about now too." "He's not worried," Michelle said under his breath, but secretly he hoped the girl's father was right. "Better be worried." Michelle told the girl's dad that they were going to a pub on the main street, and just a few minutes later they were standing across the street from it. It was amazing how much quicker it was when you had someone who knew the area to show you the way, and it made Michelle feel that much worse about all the time he spent wandering through the back streets. Like George had said, the pub acted as a restaurant during the day, and it was packed to the brim with men on their lunch breaks. Eating had always been a quiet affair in Michelle's life, so this was a brand new experience for him. It felt like he'd come to a festival. Before long, they caught sight of a man pacing back and forth in front of the building. It was his brother, George. And when he spotted Michelle, he frantically ran over, shouting, "Michelle!" So frantically, in fact, he tripped over his own feet and face-planted halfway there. But the bigger a fool George made out of himself, the happier it made Michelle. "What'd I tell you?" the girl's father said, patting him on the shoulder. "George?" "Yeah?" After things had settled down and they parted ways with the girl and her father, George and Michelle sat down for late lunch. It was a very primitive meal, consisting of thin pieces of torn meat placed on slices of bread and eaten only with your hands. Michelle was having a great deal of difficulty with it. "Were you worried about me?" he asked, trying to be as casual as possible. George took a swig of some watery wine to wash down what he had in his mouth, then pounded his chest a few times. He swallowed, opening his mouth, and let out an impressively colossal belch. Michelle had never seen his brother act so unrefined, but apparently that kind of behavior was allowed here. It seemed to even be the norm. "The heck you talking about, kid? Of course I was. I just about had a heart attack when I saw you were gone." "That was more excitement than you had signed up for, huh? Mother would be very unhappy with you." "I mean, yeah, I don't want to go through another one of her lectures," George said with a strained laugh. He looked softer and more affectionate than his usual vivacious self. "But mostly I was scared something would happen to you, Michelle." Michelle's hand froze in midair, holding a piece of the meat on bread thing. Meat on bread thing. Thought you would just laugh it off if you lost me, honestly. What do you think I am? Some kind of cold-hearted monster? I'm just joking, Michelle said, sneaking a peek at his brother's pouting face over his meat. He wanted to give a nice hearty laugh, but the most he could manage was a restrained smile. And for a child who didn't smile much at all, he'd done quite a bit of that today. Hey, George? Yeah? I'm sorry for disappearing on you like that. George's jaw dropped. Well, I'll be damned. I'd never thought I'd hear you apologize for anything, Michelle. What do you think I am? Some kind of emotionless hobgoblin? I'm just pulling your leg. I'm sorry for not keeping a better eye on you, too. Maybe you weren't so busy looking at every single girl we walked past, that wouldn't have been a problem. Come on, don't twist the knife. That's where we're supposed to hug and say, yeah, we're both messed up. Yeah, we both messed up. George put his face in his hands and faked crying for a few seconds, and when he looked up again, he had a big smile on his face, which put a little bit of one on Michelle's as well. His father would never panic like that, no matter what happened to Michelle. He was too concerned about appearances, but his brother was different. George got scared for him, almost cried for him, panicked so much he made a complete fool of himself, and that was enough. Michelle didn't have to be jealous of the girl and her father. His family loved him too, and he was happy he'd had the chance to see so for himself. Hey, George? Yeah? Let's do this again sometime. Heck yeah. Next time Mom and Dad and our scary big brother are out. Let's go. It was extremely rare that they were all out of the house at the same time, so it was possible there would never be a next time. But Michelle still dreamed of the day it would happen. Even if it was a few years from now. As long as this wasn't the last time, he would be happy. When he came back, he would go see that girl again. He'd go find her family's shop, and if there were a pair of leather sandals and a bag for sale, he'd buy them. Then he'd ask the girl what her name was. Would she even remember him in a few years? Would he even remember her in a few years? In all likelihood, neither of them would remember this day, but a little dream didn't hurt anyone. He could still feel her soft hands in his, and he could still see her big, inquisitive eyes, like two little balls of glimmering jade. Giselle! Oh my god! It was just fate! Two babies! Aww. That's so good. Oh, I'm so happy. Oh, there's so much happiness and all that. I'm just gonna end it. I just want to sleep on that. I just want to sleep on happiness. I'm scared of even if the next one could be happy too. I don't want to risk the chance. Besides, it's already 12 when I usually stop. End it. Wholesome. That was so cute. Oh. Well, as today's session. It's so cute. Oh, good. Well, thank you for coming. Oh, see you next time. Whee! That's so cute. Bye bye. Good night.